Hello and welcome to the 15th and final 18th Brumaire Livestream. We're going to finish up Chapter 7 today. We have a small but elite panel with us today. We have all the way from the burning forests in the burning mangroves. Esri, how's it going?
Doing good. You know, my bronze statue is crashing down on top of the Vendome column. You know, so it's been a pretty solid day. I have a hell of a hangover, so you know everything's shaping up. Big anniversary drinking last night, so that was fun.
Were you outside? Did you go celebrating last night? The coronavirus. What would we call it?
Announcements.
Diagnosis.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing, Tom, is that I was already out on the town celebrating my anniversary with Sophia. And we're having a lovely time by the lake, sharing our feelings about our second anniversary. And I go to take a selfie. And as the flash goes off, I get an AP News update. And I'm like, you know, as if to say cheese, you know, I'm like, Trump has coronavirus, you know, click. There's a lovely picture of that picture on our there's a lovely picture on Twitter where we're just smiling from ear to ear, like, you know, it's Christmas morning. Happy anniversary, Sophia. You know,
should we bother even recording this like the 18th Brumaire now that Trump's dead? You know, has it lost its relevance?
Coronavirus, it's real.
I feel like we're in the Kim Jong-un death speculation phase.
That's pretty apt, Kyle.
No, I saw him. He was at a military review. No, really.
Well, this morning I was reading about the speech given by a naval doctor where he had stressed that Trump did not receive, you know, auxiliary oxygen, you know, at any point. And, you know, it was a little bit old news, like 13 minutes old. And as I'm reading it, I get on the AP. As I'm reading this on the AP, I get interrupted with an AP news break. Trump was administered auxiliary oxygen before going to the military hospital. Like, I'm in the middle of the sentence. I don't know. Yeah, by the time this podcast is over, by the time we're done, by the time we're done talking about this historical event, who knows what will have transpired outside the walls of our podcast. Our broadcast.
I'm telling you, by the time like this, like I get all these edited up and they're being released, you know, there could be like, you know, US Armageddon might have struck by then. Like, all I'll say to you is enjoy the fact that he has corona, because when Boris Johnson had corona here, I was like fucking dancing. And even though he didn't die, I still had a lot of fun thinking about what would happen if he died. So, like, just go with it, people. That's what I say.
I feel like if Johnson had died, it would have been far greater chaos than if Trump dies. Because if Trump dies, it's just like, okay, well, Pence doesn't have COVID. The rules say he's the president. And I guess we can get on with business. Like, I think people are freaking out to like, it's not like there aren't succession rules, you know? It's not like presidents haven't died on the job before. This is,
Kyle, let's be honest. If anything, if Trump dies, order is restored. Like,
yeah, no, like, I'm like, kind of like, okay, yeah. But, you know, I honestly, I am absolutely here for just like the poetic justice of this guy who has been, you know, doing all these huckster snake oil cures for COVID, possibly dying of COVID. It's good. Even if it means we get President Pence, it's still good.
Now, but let's have some decorum. You know, as an American, like, I feel like we should look past partisan politics, and we shouldn't be so misanthropic to celebrate someone getting coronavirus because of the potential political advantage. We should celebrate Trump getting coronavirus because he's an awful person. So as a human, I'm happy that he got coronavirus.
Exactly. I feel like that's where most people are on this.
Yeah. Let's have some decency here, okay?
Fuck that. I'll take it all. The other thing is like I don't know, Kyle. I think if he died, it would nearly be more interesting, because I think the Republican Party was so under his spell, the base and all that. Like, what would happen to them when this like fucking god character for them just carted right before an election? Like they would just be like utter disarray. And I don't think that the Republican Party is just going to go back to like fucking Eisenhower Republicans. It's going to be more than this QAnon shit. To even a greater extent, the amount of goddamn like conspiracy theories will go through the roof. They'll say, "Oh, the deep state gave it to him. God damn it!" And they gave it to all the entourage. Like, it would be just epic.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, Pence is basically a dominionist, it seems like. So that's certainly not going to go back to Eisenhower republicanism. That's way off the table.
This is the last shot for an evangelical president, so I'm sure there's a lot of evangelicals, very quietly praying for the same thing that we are.
Yes, I love that. Oh,
is it? But I think
communal prayer to pray for the death of the president. Just please, Lord, may you strike him down so that your true chosen one may ascend and give us a godly republic.
If only evangelicals were that consistent. Most of them have like absolutely gone in for Trump and are.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah, like as Nietzsche said, it would be better if the believers truly believed. To paraphrase, I think it would be better for everyone if the believers really believed. But here we are. So
as my father said to me about like trying to get me to go back to the church, he said, "Sure, I don't. I go on every Sunday to mass. Sure, I don't believe half of it."
Yeah.
Nobody believes anything.
It was it was very funny to see like the stock market like kind of start to crash, but then sort of like stabilize. People be like, maybe this isn't such a bad thing. I don't really know.
The stock market was like, oh no, well, maybe. You could really feel that animal spirit, couldn't you?
Oh yeah. Definitely. Après-moi ? Yeah.
Okay. Right, well, let's get to the text a wee bit here. Last week, we kind of got to a point here where we're dealing with this very interesting passage where Marx talks about like what it was about the peasants and the material conditions and that made them into the class that they were, as opposed to, say, the proletarians. And I know certainly that Kyle was like wanting to do a little bit more in this. So I made up this cool little table here that we haven't had enough tables since the TSSI series.
Tom, so I thought this doesn't spell good tidings for the timing of the ending of this episode. But yes, go on.
There's only three of us. There's no Derek, so we're okay yet. So Esri's having what would we say, analytical Marxist orgasms when she saw this table. So let's go through them one by one.
I mean, it was all right, like it's there's only a few rows there.
That's
Tom.
not what you said offline. That's not what you said.
The table's just not wide enough for me, Tom. I don't know what to tell you.
As they say, oh yeah, I won't go into that. That's crude. Okay, I have some crude thoughts. Okay,
Where's every analytical possibility in a truth table? Come on. Anyway,
okay, that's true.
Let's go for it.
Let's go through these one by one. These are all the ones that Marx listed off in this in that long paragraph, and I took out the core, all the elements. So let's go through these one by one. First one. They live in similar conditions without entering into manifold relations with one another.
So I want to clarify here. When we talk about proles, are we talking about proles in 18th Brumaire times? Or are we talking about proles now? We're talking about proles now.
Yeah, proles now. Yeah.
Okay.
Like peasants versus then versus proles versus now. That was the comparison.
Yeah.
Are we more like the proles or the peasants of 18 whatever?
Okay. So I would say to the first one, yes. This is a fact of proletarian life today.
I wouldn't say yes. I would think it's like a mixed. I would think it's like maybe.
Does canceling each other on Twitter count as manifold relations? Because if so, then yes.
Well,
no, I
think a very good question.
Yeah, but also, is this not like the relations? Like, surely we have like when it says manifold, what does he mean here?
Yes. So,
many differing, like
No, there is there's a clarification of this point that Marx makes.
All right.
So their mode of production isolates them from one another instead of bringing them into mutual intercourse. The isolation is furthered by poor means of communication. So Twitter obviously is the counterpoint.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there.
That's a separate issue. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, we're going to get there. They're further down in the table. We're just talking about this very first one. This is about their living conditions. Yeah,
right. But Kyle's just trying to like disambiguate.
I think what Marx means here is that it's not that the peasants. It's that their production is based on the family farm, and their production does not interface very much with other producers, right?
Yeah, so like proles today do interface with lots of different production. So we'd have to give a yes here.
The thing is that
no here. I mean.
When we were in the conversation with Derek last time, Derek was pointing out the ways in which the productive process is designed to isolate us from one another. But I agree. I would say there's a preponderance of evidence to say no. Yes.
Yeah, like I think it's maybe not as pronounced as it was, but it is a different relation than peasants.
Yeah. Okay.
Like with their land, and that's their main, manifold relation. So we'll go through. Like.
Yes, I will agree.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll put a tilde beside them if it's maybe not as much.
No, I'm all on board now with no. You've convinced me.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. I think a clear no is fine there. Like. The real thing for me is similar conditions, because if we're talking about like the internet, then we are talking about very different strata of the proletariat coming into contact with each other. But whatever.
But even going to a shop or regularly working in another place, buying stuff from different things, having a guy come to your house to do certain stuff, like all those relations, going to your community center.
Like urban life, even some kinds of suburban life. Like not everyone is in their mom's basement, although, as Marxist.
Even rural life, having lived the village life, it's everyone there wishes that they didn't enter into manifold relations with one another, but they do. That back to the simple life, back to nature stuff is impossible. So yeah, I think the answer is a hard no. Okay, let's take proles. Yeah.
Okay. I'm down.
Okay, let's move on. Their mode of production isolates them, instead of bringing them into mutual intercourse. So that's a clear no.
I would say yes. I would say yes on that one. That's
No,
more
I
getting
can't.
to. That's
I
more
can't
getting
agree
to
with
the.
that.
I would say tilde tilde yes, where tilde tilde doesn't equal no tilde.
Okay, let me say. Okay, so
What the fuck?
I don't think I've ever been more isolated from other people than when I'm on the job. Like if you give me time off the job, I will find people to relate to. But it's there's a lot of ways in which working life these days isolates you from other people. Like
What's your job though, Kyle? What's your job? We're talking about pros. We're not talking about our own particular one. Like personally, mine, I'm working from home doing computer programming and a podcast.
Yeah.
It's isolating for me. But previously, when I was programming in offices and all that, it wasn't isolating. It totally wasn't. And I think most people working aren't isolated like that.
This is a holistic question about the mode of production, not particular jobs.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
A holistic question about the mode of production. Yeah, I guess if you look at the entire capitalist mode of production, I would have to say yes.
That it isolates them.
Sorry, no. No.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to say no.
Like that's what I mean. It's like if you're a bus driver, sorry, Ezra, you speak.
Yeah, I'm. My joke about the two tildes not equaling no tilde. It's just like a dialectics joke, basically. Like it's not that where that doesn't mean that. Where like the mode of production isolates them and brings them into mutual intercourse. The like the similar relations in the previous criterion is a kind of atomization, is a kind of, again, unity and separation. Like, it's hard. Like
that's what I'm trying to get at. Is the unity and separation. But
yeah,
like what I would say here is that there are like the mode of production. It undoubtedly has brought people together into mutual intercourse versus a peasant life. That's undoubtedly that capital has. But at the moment, we find within capitalist firms, say the breaking up into things like outsourcing, the reduction in the scale of any single company where people work, and it's all outsourced to isolate the workers and not allow them to move en masse is definitely a thing. But they would still be more together now than they would be if they were stuck on the farm. It's something that I think is probably decreasing, like that their mode of production is isolating them more now than it did previously, but it still has them more connected than peasants.
Yeah, fair.
And I do an N tilde.
Not in a actual communal sense, but in the sense that Marx means here. Yes. Yeah.
I feel like I'm running roughshod over this. I don't want to.
No, because I think we had the discussion last time about how the description that Marx is giving here, alone together. But the description that Marx is giving here is not a reference to the sort of like village life, right? Like the actual like festivals and everyone knows everyone, that kind of stuff is not a reference to that. And I think in that regard, I think there's a stark difference between the proletarian and the peasant.
Ezri,
okay.
Do you have anything more to say, Ezri, on that one?
Just Please cut me clearing my throat. That was bad. Anyway, what do I have to say here? The mode of production does bring people into mutual intercourse, but I think the next question about isolation increased by poor communications is where things are really going to get interesting. Because I think Marx is probably talking about, poor communication capacity. Mm-hmm. And clearly communication capacity has increased significantly, but poor communication. Yes.
I also want to add that whenever Marx says communication, he also means transportation.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a solid point. So like communication capacity and, transportation capacity is, coronavirus aside with transportation capacity, right? Like if we could put that aside just for a moment, and perhaps we shouldn't, but like, I think you can make this case without it, is that like the quality of our communication is arguably distorted beyond like recognition, in part by our incredible communication capacity, and the quality of our communications is like somehow mutilated by the frequency with which we can communicate with anyone all the time, which is why so many people find it hard to stay on social media and experience such relief when they go off. Like,
yeah. I mean, the good communications we have are designed to be hellish. So, like, these platforms we can use to communicate on are basically engineered to cause angst and misery. So, that's a weird thing.
And a kind of loneliness that encourages you to continue.
Yeah.
I've
added an extra line. I don't know if you've noticed.
I saw that.
That about sums up my feelings there. So is it the poor communications that is isolating us now?
No,
it's the good communications.
Not. Yeah.
So I've added, for people don't know, I've on this table we have increased by poor isolation, increased by poor communication. That's what Mark said, and we've said, well, no, they're not isolated by poor communications. We added another line: isolation increased by good communications. So it's a weird. Like, I think not all of I think you could probably do this with a lot of these actual things we're going to investigate.
I'm afraid I'm going to sound like a contrarian. You gave me the chance to have a yes/no table, Tom, and I'm going to be an awful dialectical contrarian about it. I feel like I need to take a look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move
stare
on.
Into the abyss.
No,
the abyss
I know.
Back at you.
The abyss does and does not stare back.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. Do you know the only reason I know that quote, like, really, it's like the only thing in Nietzsche I've ever read, because it was in like a Marvel comic from like the 90s. I think it was the Infinity Gauntlet or something. I always remember
Thanos quoting Nietzsche.
Solid.
It literally was. Yeah, it literally was.
True edgelord hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I bet Thanos read his entire oeuvre. It's like, yeah, man, that's me. I rule.
Yeah.
Infinity Gauntlet. What a lot of. How does a fucking catastrophe of filmmaking like that become like the highest grossing film of all time? Fuck.
What? I can't hear you.
You heard me. Don't tell me you like fucking Infinity Gauntlet.
It was a lot of fun. I watched all those. Like, I ignored them for years, and I was like, oh, I love Marvel comics, but God, I fucking hate this whole media craze. And then, I don't know, like, I moved back to where I grew up, like, for a while, and was just like, was in like a rough spot, and like one of my old friends and we watch it every week. I'm like, this isn't so bad. Like, Iron Man 2 is one of the worst movies I've ever seen, but I fucking loved it. Thank you, KGB operative. That is more or less where I'm coming from.
On every issue.
Thank you.
Dear, no.
I
Sorry.
appreciate the non-binary representation in chat.
Okay, let's move it on. Yeah, like the only good ones that are worth watching, I think, are the Wolverine ones. They're actually quite fun. Nearly all the rest of them are shite.
And unfortunately, that stuff isn't even like worked into a so-called Marvel Cinematic Universe for copyright reasons.
Why?
We can leave this all aside.
Let's not talk
Let's
about
keep going.
this.
Let's keep going. Yeah. Okay.
If Star Trek is one thing, but I mean Marvel movies, come now, Tom.
Right.
Isolation increased by poverty. Gonna go for a hard yes in both cases.
I'm trying to think of a counter evidence for this or something that, like, you know, some people wouldn't leave the house if it didn't mean going to work, but like even in those cases, they would still have more time to like form connections in their off time, even with people online, if they didn't have to fucking go to work. So, yeah.
Let's go. Yeah, I can't argue with a yes there. Their area of work denies the division of labor, application of science. There's no diversity of development, variety of talent, wealth of social relations.
I would say increasingly yes for both, or for the proles.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? Because
this division. We could break this up. We could break it up. Let's break this
Right.
up into the different ones because that's too fucking thrown together. Okay.
No, I agree with that because like division of labor. Okay, increasingly people have to like wear many hats, but you know, depending on where you are, there is still like division of labor. If you work in, you know, like a really big enterprise, there's a massive division of labor.
It's a massive, like the overall thing is mass division of labor, like.
But it really does depend where you are.
But I would also say the tendency is increasingly in the opposite direction, due to basically like automation designed to de-skill workers and isolate them.
But that was the case in Marx's time as well. They were de-skilling the workers, but they were still in a division of labor. They were still like operating this could only operate trained to operate this one pulsy machine.
This is what Derek was talking about last time in terms of essentially creating. I mean.
Like there are cases like you're working in a McDonald's and maybe now there's one person does lots of the jobs. It's all kind of collapsed into one with all the machinery. But that's just the natural tendency of capital going towards de-skilling the labor. But like their division is still there. It's just a different division of labor. I don't
think the division is there in that case, but I think it is in many other cases.
Yeah, that's that's a good example of how this is sort of reversing.
McDonald's has actually homogenized the labor process. The people are like really purely interchangeable. There is no actual like meaningful division of labor there. But again, that's not representative of all of capitalism.
Yeah, so I think even with that like counter tendency, I would still say that, you know, denying the division of labor, that's clearly not on the table. Like we have divisions of labor that in the same production process that span many countries. So even like though within those units,
that's a very good point. Yep.
Yeah, so even within those like production
and
units,
I would say if you were to look at like, you know, within firms, you might see some divisions of labor being destroyed. But I think the overall tendency, if you were to look at like how people would describe what their jobs are, you know, there are more now than there was in Marx's time. There is a greater division.
No, yeah,
I think that's undeniable.
No, I'm saying relative to recent capitalism, not relative to the peasant time of Marx.
Yeah.
Even then, I would think, I don't know, I would be very wary of making a claim that division of labor isn't increasing.
Yeah.
It's decreasing. Yeah, very wary, because you'd have to see proper stat on that to say something like that. Their area of work deny.
There's a visible counter tendency within firms, like within like particular, I should say, job sites, where one worker wears many hats, and that's not just for the proletariat, but it's also, you know, for various types of like salaried work, you know.
Yeah. So
however we draw the line.
So let's I think you're right though, Tom. When we look at the level of the mode of production, we have to concede that the division of labor is continuing to intensify. I think what maybe is going on, like maybe is worth noting, is that this may not be true in the service sector for proles. Which is, you know, an enormous number of people in America. So I think that is a particular distinction worth making, even as we acknowledge that at the mode of production level, the division of labor is absolutely increasing.
Yeah. Okay. Next, their area of work. I've divvied this out into 3 bits. Their area of work denies the application of science. Therefore, there's no diversity of development.
Okay. So this is a tough one. There is no diversity of development. Is that in terms of productive forms? Or
I think that's no diversity of development of no diversity of development of the
multifariousness of development, no diversity of talent,
so your work,
no wealth of social relationships. So no application of science, and therefore no multifariousness of development. It's got to be in the productive form.
So that's
right?
a no.
It's a hard no.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
No.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so next, no variety of talent. I think there's lots of different variety of talent. Look at all the people you grew up with in your class who are pros, and they're all working at different. No variety of talent. What does he mean by that? Actually, shit. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of like looking at both of these, like, like
no diversity of talent. Sorry, no diversity of talent.
I think it's, you know, these people do not have diverse skill sets.
Yeah, right? And in, I don't know, in what world does, like, you know, just to double back a bit, like the application of science come in a lot of these bullshit jobs, like.
Well, the application of science comes in the de-skilling of everyone, because the science is divorced from the proletarians.
Well, it
is applied to them as a weapon.
Well, right, you know? But I feel like this is sort of the opposite of what Marx means. Like, again, we've, you know, doubled back in this fucking dialectical way where, like, the application of science doesn't actually lead to diversity of development.
It does.
But like, it's a question of. So I think we need to draw a distinction between the previous one, application of science, diversity of development, and the second one, multifariousness of talent. Because in the first case, if you're asking, is there a diversity of productive forms that are given rise to by the use of science, I think there absolutely is today.
Right, but I think that's supposed to. I think,
but at the same time, I don't think that leads to a multifariousness of proletarian talent in many cases, because the science is divorced from the proles.
Right, which is very different than what Marx was like getting at by the application of science. There's a sort of like, there's a sort of defensive reaction sometimes with Marx, that Marx never had that Kautskian narrative of the proletariat becoming more like disciplined and skilled by capitalism. But I think in these passages, you can clearly see that he believes that, you know, the proletariat will become more skilled and will become more scientifically literate just from working in capitalism.
Shouldn't that be obvious for Marx's arguments against public education?
Yeah.
Like he basically argues that people are going to get various skills on the job that will help them to take over society, and therefore it's better for them to like essentially learn there than to learn in schools.
Yeah. So like I think as stated, I think I can agree with you, but for like the for what I know Marx is thinking, like the application of science, you know, leading to the diversity of development. I mean, and this is all stated in negatives, right? You know, like we're talking about the peasants and, you know, their area work denies the application of science. Therefore, then I guess if this is a therefore relation and it's an if-then relation, and the consequent is denied, then the relationship is always true, logically speaking.
Oh my God, that's worse than Marx in Nature. Speak English now.
I'm sorry. Okay, if you have an if-then relation, if A then B, and
Jesus, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant.
And then you say
with regards
A,
to this question,
it's like if A then B is only not true if you have A and not B. Okay, like in every other relation, in every other truth table scenario. Okay, like it's the relationship holds. So I would say yes, because you know the if here is denied.
Oh my God, I'm lost.
Of course, this is an argument between Aristotle and the Stoics. And all right, you put a true false relationship and a therefore relationship here. You want me to not whip out my my Aristotle? I don't know what to tell you, Tom.
Does the proles? Is there no multifariousness of talent amongst the proles due to the application of science?
I would say it's very limited. It's very limited.
So I'm not.
You're
cutting out, Tom. You're
cutting out. I was wondering if that was just me. I'm just saying it's it's logical.
What am I?
Just holds up.
Sorry, my internet is up and down. Can you hear me?
Yes,
you're back.
Yeah.
You're back.
We can hear you now. I still have a Vulcan resentment about this denial of logic, but whatever. But yeah, I could hear you, and now I can't hear you. It's my Katra is blocking your internet connection.
God damn it! That'll teach me to start slagging you for your analytical philosophy again. No. Your logic.
Hey, this is okay.
What is the talent here then? So what does he mean by talent here? Because
like people's talents,
skills.
Yeah,
so that there's not a range of talents.
I think you see an enormous multifariousness of talent promoted by YouTube, but not promoted by the workplace for proles.
Right, yeah. Like if people develop their talents in spite of the deadening, like robbing, soul destroying work that they do.
I don't know. I think proles do learn talents in the job. I think it's undeniable.
Like what? Like data entry and
like we're always like when we can always pick the worst jobs. Like when we're talking about the proles as a class, like you know, like I was a prole. You know, I got skilled up in programming. You know, my mate was a prole. He got trained up in electrician. Like, and another friend of mine's a prole, and he's like working for like the minister. Like fucking keeping the water pipes going in Ireland. Like we're all proles. We've all been trained up within the jobs. Like
for sure. But I mean, is that the predominant position of the global proletariat? Like
this is what I'm getting at. Like, is the predominant position the most de-skilled jobs? Because most people I know, if they're pro, they're like, they might be a nurse, or they might be a next door neighbor who's a crane driver, or a train driver who's a pro. He learned how to drive a train. You know,
I mean, I think once you have like a meaningful credential, like a nurse, that puts you out of the realm of, you know, just the regular proletariat. And that's not to like dish on nurses, PMC, you know, like that's not the point. It's just like, that's, you know, people get a nurse credential in part because they don't want to be paid like proles. Like, and I think that's fair, like, honestly. And, you know, they should have, you know, they should be able to have unions and bargaining and all that stuff. Like, you know, Sophie wants to be a nurse. Like, my partner wants to be a nurse.
Say somebody with no training. Say somebody that has no training, no entry to it. Like, say, working in the buildings.
Yeah.
Massive one.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they do learn. They do have, you know, like, I think that there is like sections of it that have like the most worst crappy stuff to work in. But like, I think that there are others, like, you know, like, remember Marx was writing at the time where like the proles had very tedious jobs as well. Like,
oh sure,
this is true.
But he have said,
he
would have said that they had multifariousness of talent. I would have thought.
I think the thing is, like, we're coming at this from the perspective of deindustrialization and the sort of service sector proletarian wasteland that it engenders, right? And in that sense, in that particular case, I think it really doesn't lead to a multifariousness of talent. But the point you're making, Tom, about just sort of like, you know, many of the jobs that are necessary for a manifold form of production to exist, creating a multifariousness of talent based on division of labor, is absolutely valid. So, you know, it's just that I think on an emotional level and on a level of sort of like what sticks in my mind as what is the paradigm of capitalism today, it very much is that, you know, Walmart comes into town and, you know, the factories move out, and it's just, it just lays waste to everything and creates a monoculture of talentlessness. So I think that, you know, probably you're right, Tom, overall. There is a counter tendency, but again, we shouldn't extrapolate that to the entirety of capitalism.
Yeah, I guess the basic tension here, right, is that Marx is looking at the sort of, I don't know, ideal average of, you know, what proletarian relations are in the 18th century. And in 2020 here, we're witnessing the breakdown of that ideal average. Like, or, you know, we could say it's, you know, a new phase of it or something like that. But it appears to be like a decline of this logic and a sort of kind of disaggregation and sort of disintegration of the logic that Marx is talking about. Like, and it doesn't seem to us as to be not capitalism, you know, like it seems to us to be like a distinct phase of capitalism where it reverses some of its earlier trends or something like that.
We also need to take into account when we think about those cases, who the inhabitants of a deindustrialized town are entering into multifarious relations with, which is a greater scale of people than it has ever existed before in history.
Yeah, you know? and I guess, like, you know, like, yeah, being like a Walmart greeter or, you know, being stuck at Walmart and like working there, like it is gonna, like, you know, put you in contact with a lot of people, and, you know, you might, I don't know, someone might come out of that with some like increased like social chops. The people that I know that have worked at Walmart, you know, came out more isolated and more bitter and more like
absolutely
kind of socially frustrated. So
Yeah.
it's hard for me to think in the
No,
way.
I'm sorry.
that-
I was referring to the. I was trying to refer to the manifold relations, not the multifarious relations.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that
yeah.
makes sense.
Like, I think that there, like, even in Marx's time, there was that tendency too. There's a tendency of increasing the talent or the multifariousness of talent, but at the same time, also, like, through increase in productivity, dumbing it down at the same time. That increase in productivity allows new businesses and types to come up with the, a proliferation of talent, and then a dumbing down. Is like that. I think that tension has always been there.
Yeah, I suppose you're right, Tom. Like those kids that, he's talking about that are being like worked to death in the factories in, Capital Volume 1, like are they building up a multifariousness of talent? Like, so
No,
yeah.
Yeah, like he's slag, he's a, yeah. Sorry for interrupting.
No. I think you might be right that we're exaggerating the degree that this is new, but it also just sort of makes Marx seem a bit more inconsistent for holding the peasantry to this standard, and greatly implying that, well, they're totally different than the proletariat.
Well, like if just for myself, like applying this to like the say, Marx is writing this at the peasantry that were in Ireland that I kind of know about. I'm not so sure about the French peasantry, but they literally, the British were always like, in their government documents writing about them, giving them out, like, all you needed to do in Irish soil is like just have a few potatoes. If you had like an acre, you could feed your family, and then you could make potato fucking vodka, poutine, and they could live the good life. Literally, they just grow spuds, get wasted,
Man.
And like they were giving out about like their low productivity. But like the thing is, to do that in Ireland, you needed no skill. All you needed was to be able to put a fucking spud in the ground and get a bit of manure from like someplace. Like
right.
There was like, and that's what he's trying to get at for the like. And there was talent didn't come into it. You know what I mean? There's no fucking talent.
You gotta have talent to make that vodka.
Poutine, yeah. It's fucking. Have you ever had Irish poutine? It's like
I have not.
It's about 90% proof.
Oh God.
180, like whatever, 95% alcohol, 90 to 95%, and you put it on your tongue. My father used to get it. They make it illegally around where I am. There's like people. They call them poutine stills.
Wow,
it's like moonshine kind of stuff.
Yeah, potato moonshine. Wow.
Yeah, and it's like you put it on your tongue and you can feel it evaporating off your tongue. It's that alcoholic. It's just like you drink it, you want to die. Like, a lot of people do die from drinking it a lot. I'm gonna put an N in there. I feel really bad. I feel like you keep on going, yes, and then I go, no, I argue, and then I go, no, I'll put an N in, yes. But like,
hey Tom, it's your show. We're just panelists there.
This table is meaningless then, because we'll end up with fucking about 6 different tables if we were to do it. I'll put an N.
Okay.
I mean, we got to get back to the Brumaire at some point. So let's finish this table.
Okay.
If you want to deny the laws of logical consequence, it's it's fine with me. Just as long as we get back to the Brumaire.
But this is one thing, like actual things we really want to.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Certainly.
No. I appreciate what you're doing here.
Okay. No wealth of social relations. I gotta say, on this one,
is this social or is it societal?
I think when we were talking about this
with
Emmanuel stressed that this translation was societal.
Yes. That's
so
right.
This is an end. Because there you do have, in society, you're shopping from different people and you've got a wealth, and you're not just with you to the land and giving your corn to the fucking Lord. You have economic, social relations with many people. Isn't that it? As opposed to societal relations.
Yeah,
which is
I guess it is a form of relation. Yeah, totally.
It's not like a deep social relation, but if we're gonna, what you have to do is go ahead and just put societal in brackets there.
Yeah.
then I think I could live with the end. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
All right, you're saying it should be societal relations.
Yes.
from what we were saying with Emmanuel, and this was Cosmoprolet in the Discord corroborated this. They both speak actual Germanic languages, not just English, which is supposedly a Germanic language. But I mean, come on.
It's us, Dutch, and Frisian are counterfeit Germanic languages.
Precisely.
Yeah. Great. Cool.
So what are we saying here? Because I'm confused now. I don't know what's going on.
Societal, Tom. Societal. It's societal.
So I'm totally confused now. So what are we saying here when it's society? When we say societal,
it means that basically a relationship with society. Like for the peasant, there isn't really society, society is a thing that comes into being with the capitalist mode of production, as an entity that is made up of the various productive relations. All this multifariousness stuff is what we're talking about.
Okay, so we're good to go.
Yeah.
I say it's not social relations and it's societal relations. Yeah, I could live with that. Yeah, let's move on.
Yeah.
This table is a bad idea. Each family is almost self-sufficient, acquires the means of life through exchange with nature, then in course with society. So that's a hard no.
Absolutely no.
Yeah, absolutely not. Nature is gone. Like, what? Families are not self-sufficient. Like, absolutely not. Like,
they are not capable of enforcing their class interests.
Oof.
Well, peasants weren't, but
there are rare cases where the proletariat is able to. It is not unheard of. It is extremely rare, but it happens.
Well, it does happen. I think it is a thing that they're capable, not like that they are, but that they're capable.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually when it's this is not like the most Marxist point, but it's usually when there's a memory of communal life from some previous mode of living that they're able to muster a labor movement. But I think that capable is the word. It's
there are however more modern cases you could point to. For example, when the the air traffic controllers stopped the government shutdown in the U.S.
Right. Yeah. Before Reagan broke them. Yeah.
No. I mean recently.
Oh.
There was I forget exactly who it was who was involved in the air industry, but there was basically a unionized group in air transportation who went on strike, and that stopped the government shutdown that the Republicans were doing.
So not the Patco strike in the 80s. This is
no. So but there I can point to counterexamples like the
I think that's fair.
The airline unions in Canada tried to fight Stephen Harper and were destroyed. He broke them. But in that case with the air traffic controllers, it really was, or not the air traffic controllers, with the government shutdown, it really was the class interest of the workers that stopped the shutdown. And I think that's an example that, yes, it's capable in some cases. It can happen.
I mean, so workers are capable of asserting their class interests. Enforcing is what I have trouble with.
How is that not an enforcement? They kicked the politicians' asses into gear to get the state moving again.
No, look, in that case, sure. It's just the vast minority of cases now, I guess, is
yes, I agree. I agree with that.
So So, but okay, but like, but if we're talking as written, capable of enforcing, it doesn't have to be the majority of cases. You know, like, so there's a sense in which, even though, you know, it's like it's possible that they are capable of enforcing their class interests. Where Marx is saying it is, you know, not possible. They are not capable of enforcing their class interests. So, like if you really put it in those stark terms, like
there were peasant rebellions and things like that, but they never succeeded in overthrowing anything.
Well, okay, but
yeah, but like
that's not the criterion we're working with here. He's saying, I believe the thing that he is saying. So, okay, he says, insofar as there is merely a local interconnection among these smallholding peasants, and their identity and the identity of their interests forms no community, no national bond, and no political organization among them, they do not constitute a class. They are therefore incapable of asserting their class interest in their own name, whether through a parliament or a convention. Well, in that case, they cannot represent themselves. They must be represented. Gee, this is a rough one.
Yeah, see, we're getting into the real hard questions of proletarian, you know, organization and capitalism. Because, like, even in China, where there is raging class struggle, the honest commentators are like, look, the proletariat has no organizations of its own. Like, and it's possible that, you know, the way the proletariat represents itself has to be much more direct, and that the way Marx thought about these things is just plain wrong. But, like, there's a part of me that's not willing to cede that point. But the empiricist in me, when looking at history and looking at the present situation, is like,
well, I mean, it's not the case that it's never happened in history.
Right.
That, like, this thing has happened, like, that what Marx is describing, the peasants being unable to do, like, okay, so the proletariat has at times done the thing that Marx says the peasants cannot.
Okay.
That is a true thing.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, that is not what the proletariat does.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Like, if you ask me, I don't know, maybe I'm being too crude here, but like, there's been like there's probably how many major proletarian moments have there been? 1848, 1870, 1917. Is that it? It feels it feels like for me that our politics are still washed through with 1917, and that there hasn't been another, a joining together of the proletariat as a class to act as a class since then. There's been maybe 3 major ones in history. I know there's been ones in other countries too, but I'm just talking like they feel
you're talking
like
about the global stage.
Yeah,
like you're talking about arguably the waves of decolonization, even though
some more so than
others. Revolution, whatever.
Yeah, like they feel like to me all wrapped up in 1917. They feel like wrapped up in
1945. Like that has its the end of World War I, the end of World War II has its own dynamic, and and because in the end of World War II, we're talking about like colonized peoples almost exclusively asserting themselves, because most of the post-war compromises in the Allied powers and even some of the defeated Axis powers, it's to placate exactly those populations, to placate the proletariat in those populations, British socialism or
Let's go through this one by one. Okay, so merely a local interconnection. Is that true of the proletariat?
Absolutely not.
No, right?
Where are we getting these ones? Have I missed some?
This is the preamble to the thing that we're talking about. This is insofar as there is merely a local connection. It's down further in the paragraph.
Okay.
Insofar as there is merely a local
yeah.
Okay, so yes.
there's more than a local interconnection for the proletariat. The identity of their interests forms no community. I think we can't say that's true of the proletariat, right? Like,
we can't say that it forms no community.
Yeah, the identity of their interests, like
they form unions and other things.
It's clear that in many cases it has formed a community of mutual interest.
Historically speaking.
Yeah, historically speaking, that is true.
I could defend that historically speaking.
But today, maybe not.
That does seem to be the main difference between, the pre-70s and our time.
Yeah. Okay, no national bond.
I mean, like, there's definitely national bonds in a way. Like, seems like one of the most durable forms of bonds, even though it's like often in a toxic form. Like, I'm kind of depressed. I'm a little depressed by this, but like, there is some kind of lingering. Like, there are some people that are actually sad about Trump getting coronavirus just because he's the leader of the nation. Not because they like him, but I gotta, I have to wipe a single tear from my eye.
That has nothing to do. Well, does that have anything to do with the idea of America as a workers' nation?
No, unless Trump is standing up for the workers against all the moochers.
But I feel like that's just going into weird fucking like hard right socialism bullshit. So I don't know.
I mean, it is, but that's the Republican Party's rhetoric, and that's like
yeah.
That, there's like, I don't know. That's the form of workers' identity that's mostly alive in the United States, and the way that ties in and builds up to the nation. Like, that's the thing I'm having trouble with.
Right, and it is a thing that politicians consistently play to, the idea of national workers' interests. Like, even if they don't legislate in favor of it, they do have to pay at least lip service to the idea, right?
Especially with the whole essential workers thing. That was one of the most interesting moments, because the essential proletariat is like I don't know. It's like a conversation I had about some, like, the nihilist communist pamphlet. You know what I mean? By Monsieur Dupont, who like just excoriates the whole Marxist tradition, but like still thinks there's an essential proletariat that keeps shit running. That if they strike, it's all over. Like, I know it's not the exact same thing, but the whole concept of an essential worker popping up in the national discourse kind of flipped my wig because of that. I was like, what? Is DuPont in the air? What is this? And,
there was a very brief moment where those people were considered to be valuable in a very, very, very short moment in time. And then they went back to paying them nothing. And
there was some, like Soviet-style celebrations of the essential workers for a while.
Yeah.
That was very charming.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So national bond, we could say it exists. No political organization among them.
Yeah, I mean, unless you count the Labor Party.
Yeah, it's like there are political organizations that co-opt them, and that is more than you could ever say for the peasantry, right?
And there was, like in Ireland in the around Marx's time, there definitely was peasant organizations. There was land reform movement, and there was stuff like that. So, I'm wondering how strong these ones are. And the peasants definitely had a national bond.
Through Bonaparte, through Bonaparte they did.
So I'm skeptical of Marx's description of those two.
Yeah, and I mean, how do you talk about the USSR without talking about the class interests of the peasantry? Like,
well, that's
in
what
the
I
way
meant.
that's politically organized. You know what I mean? Even like the defenders of the USSR, like.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say, like, the SRs were not peasants, but they definitely represented a kind of peasant class interest.
Yeah. And like the Bolsheviks weren't of the proletariat, nor were the Mensheviks. You know what I mean? Like,
that's kind of what I meant as well by saying that the 1945 kind of revolutions were like the 1917 one, because they were mostly peasant. You know what I mean? That's why I kind of feel like that they're kind of similar. I don't know if that's...
I can kind of see that.
Like it wasn't a new model of organization. It was a kind of a similar, Leninist, Stalinist kind of organization for a lot of them.
It depends on the country, but there's there is a I don't know. There's a like peasant class interest dynamic that is playing into the casting off some of the imperial world system. I don't think it's fair to say that's an extension of Russia, because Russia was an empire. You know what I mean? And we're talking about countries casting off imperial chains.
It is true. It is true. I'm kind of dumbing it down, but I don't. Yeah, I just don't feel like there's been a huge I don't feel like the 1940s stuff, like I would say Chinese getting the British out or whatever. I don't feel like that was a new, and it didn't feel like a new model. It doesn't feel like a new model to me of proletarian organization.
I mean, China seems to be the obvious case where there's a Leninist application, and there's still like an explicit block of 4 classes and that sort of thing. I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree here. 45 has its own. 45 is a specific set of the proletariat having its own revolutionary wave, and arguably, these are bourgeois revolutions, but arguably, what actually ends up happening with 1917 is a prolonged, painful transition to capitalism. So
I let it all this shite out. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I was kind of thinking mainly China in my head. How many of the 45 revolutions, I suppose, were kind of Marxist? Or socialist? Are we talking about the Eastern Bloc? Is that what you mean? Those ones?
No. In the outside of Yugoslavia, none of those countries were set up by revolutions.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm
talking about decolonization.
Okay, not really.
Break up the British Empire.
Yeah, but I don't even think of them as, how many of them were actually explicitly socialist?
I'm just saying that there was a wave of revolutions. I think that whether one of them is a bourgeois revolution with red flags and whether one of them is, a more honest bourgeois revolution, is kind of immaterial. The proletariat were behind not having the imperialists there anymore in both cases.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
Yep.
So
I don't know. This is big and messy. We've been doing this for an hour, but but it's kind of a question. Does Marx have a fair political read of the peasants? It seems like he kind of oversimplifies peasant dynamics in order to make the proletariat very distinct. Being taken advantage of doesn't count as political representation for Marx, because otherwise, Bonaparte would be expressing, their class interests in a way that he's granting to the proletariat. The whole point of Marx is that the proletariat are supposed to represent themselves, and we're in a situation where that seems compromised, and it seems like they can only be taken advantage of. So it's Marx's framework isn't really working out for us at the moment, if we're dissecting it into these logical binary statements.
I think that the key thing that Marx is getting at here is they are incapable of asserting their class interest in their own name, whether through a parliament or a convention. They cannot represent themselves. They must be represented. The representative must at the same time appear as their master, as an authority over them, an unlimited governmental power which protects them from the other classes and sends them rain and sunshine from above. Now, I would definitely say there have been periods in the history of the proletariat where this kind of relationship has held, right? Like
Correct.
FDR was kind of this for the workers, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Although not really in the name of the worker, like, and
No, what I mean is appear as their master, as an authority over them, an unlimited governmental power which protects them from the other classes and sends them rain and sunshine from above.
Like it's not the same way that Stalin considered himself to be. Like,
no,
was
no.
regarded as, you know what I mean? I do know what you mean. Like, FDR was doing this so that there wouldn't be a Stalin, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it's also the case,
functionally.
like, when we look at the case of Stalin, it's like, well, the proletariat in the USSR was pretty much already dead and spent at that time. When you look at FDR, that's absolutely not the case in America, you know?
Right. No. That's absolutely not the case. And, you know, FDR was like a big co-option.
And it's that kind of like FDR / Perón kind of dynamic that I think it bears some similarity to the way that Marx describes the relationship of the peasantry to Bonaparte.
Yeah.
So what if we?
I think what we come away with is like, yeah, this distinction is not as binary as we might initially think, or as Marx portrays it here.
Yeah, I think it's certainly, like, in Marx's time, the proles, like, at varying different times, acted as a class. They really did. And in our lifetimes, the proles haven't acted as a class. Like I can't
It's
think
very
of,
rare. It happens, but it's very, very rare.
you know, maybe you could say Chavismo, maybe, or Morales, or something like that. I'm not putting them up as a socialist wonderland or something, but there's definitely something like compared to what's happened in Europe, there's been nothing. Like in Europe in my time, like I suppose the last one was probably in France, was it? With Mitterrand? Was that the last time the pros kind of did anything?
I mean, I guess, but I think you're really underselling in all of those cases. The level that, you know, like, it's not really just, you know, pure pro class interest there. That is like highly mediated, and
I
agree.
And I also would say, Tom, that like the proles still assert their class interest, qua their class interest in France all the fucking time, because they have these strong legacy organizations. Like, you know, they just get out in the street and start burning shit, like, as proles, like, on the regular, to defend their class interest. Like, that is a thing that has not died in France. Unionization is pretty low in France, but the militant vanguard of the proletariat there is still quite effective politically.
Yeah, and although I wouldn't quite put it at like French levels here, you know, far be it for me to give compliments to the French. You know, like we do have militant proletarian self-representation in the United States. It's just, you know, it seems like the end of the world when the proletariat stands up to police murder. And, you know, people try to co-opt it really hard. But, you know, we have had a movement this whole year. Like, it's been going on for a long time. And I kept sort of thinking, oh, this is it. This has got to be the end of it. But no, it just keeps fucking going. So, you know, it is possible for the proletariat to assert their class interest in a way that is clearly an attack on the executive state, sometimes an attack on the political state. But it is not the kind of representation that Marx is talking about here. It's not like, you know, permanent political organization.
certainly what's happening now, like there's nothing like that at the moment. Is there anywhere? Like just because they're acting as a class, they don't have like they're not organized together as a political union operating, representing themselves for towards a goal. A lot of it is sporadic, just fuck shit up on the streets to prevent them taking our stuff. It's not it's not really, it's the bare minimum of representing yourself.
It bears what I would say. It bears more similarity to a peasant revolt than it does to a
and a labor movement.
A sustained organization with a view towards a parliament or a convention.
Correct. Yeah, like to me, it's like yeah. So it's hard to know what is being done I think personally in Europe, has there been much done in 100 years? Not too much, nothing since World War II. You would think. Is that fair?
Yeah,
or the period shortly thereafter.
May 68. However, not like earth-shattering as it seems now. There was more, organization and more radicalism that had an eye towards state power then. We don't have to glorify May 68 to say that it's it's more of a challenge than is usually offered now in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Right.
And it is still the case that there are workers' parties all over the place in Europe.
Right.
But how much do they actually represent the proletariat? Or how much are they a sort of independent power that brokers with the proletariat? That is a question.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Sorry for inflicting that on all yous.
Well, I think it was valuable because it's these things are actually more confused than Marx puts them out to be, and I think that kind of raises questions about how accurate McNair's read is of history.
Meaning?
Well, because McNair draws this hard line between what peasants can achieve politically on the basis of what Marx says here versus what the proletariat can achieve politically. And the reason why 20th century communism failed is because it was built on a peasant basis, which Marx states here cannot achieve the kind of democracy that we are aiming for, which the proletariat can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and following Lars Lee, Lars Lee explains the Civil War as creating a food supply dictatorship. In essentially the peasantry's class interest. And for all of Lars Lee's interest in, the Zimmerwald Leninists and, the connecting the Bolsheviks to the social democratic, Kautskyan tradition, that whole sort of so-called neo-Kautskyist read between Lee and McNair of Lenin and the Bolsheviks really breaks down during the Civil War, and they blame all of that on peasants and peasant class interests. And it seems like the answer must be much more complicated than that. And this is often a Trotskyist talking point that has a pretty good Marxian pedigree, but maybe it's just a bunch of bullshit.
But is the point not more so that the reason why they had to, they ended... Sorry, I don't know if I'm misinterpreting, but, it seems to me McNair's kind of, the key thing he says is that you needed it to be continental level. That...
No, so I don't think that's the key point in explaining the failure of 20th century basically like worker peasant alliance revolutionary communism. I don't think that's the key point.
Well, sorry, but the point would be
we can maybe like talk about the overall trajectory towards communism that way, but you can't explain the breakdown of internal democracy that way.
But is it not that the material conditions they didn't have, they weren't, they were, they hadn't developed. So you got to get your surplus somewhere to spend your money on your increasing your productivity. So who can you possibly exploit? And it has to be the peasants. And
Yes,
once you go down that route, you're basically going into like a hyper capitalist one, and you can only do that at the bar of the gun.
But I also think it's like McNair's argument does crucially rely on this idea that the peasants are incapable of asserting their class interests in their own name, whether through a parliament or a convention. They cannot represent themselves. They must be represented. The representative must at the same time appear as their master, as an authority over them, an unlimited governmental power which protects them from the other classes and sends them rain and sunshine from above. Like, this is, like, essentially, McNair, from what I remember, says, well, the workers were kind of defeated in the Bolshevik Revolution, and in order for the Bolsheviks to attain power, they had to assume this master form in order to have a successful political relationship with the peasantry, which ultimately led to Stalin.
Right. Which, yeah, if you want to explain the entire Soviet Union in terms of peasant class interests, it's like explaining the entire Soviet Union in terms of aristocratic class interests. Like, we're talking about the liquidation of that class as being an expression of the class interest.
Right.
But like, did Stalin not, like, he hardly protected the peasant interests class.
Yeah, it would be pretty hard to say that. That's Trotsky's critique of Stalin as doing zigzags, of leaning into the peasant class interests on at one time, borrowing from the right and then borrowing from the so-called left, and doing an incredibly insane rapid force collectivization that essentially is like, I don't know, you could call it not a democide, but by the time you're dizzy with success and you've reached 100%. You've reached 100% collectivization, and the loading bar is complete. There's a lot of blood spilled.
Yeah, so I think you're probably right, Tom, that there's a kind of slippage between the argument that Marx makes here and McNair's argument about, which is, a pretty common argument about the USSR, about, the need to proletarianize with dictatorial force, right? Like, the relationship to the peasantry was dictatorial, but not really as a benevolent master, except in rhetoric, right? It was actually a dictatorship for the Bolsheviks that, even then, that's hard to state, right? Like with Stalin, it's hard to say that the interest here was the Bolshevik interest.
It's
for the same reason, because he liquidates the Bolsheviks.
Yeah, it's more like
he just basically did that kind of thing that Marx talks about, like Bonaparte having to like assuage this class and then assuage that class and assuage this class. Except what Stalin did is he just massacred that class, massacred this class, massacred that class.
Yeah. But with with maintaining the sort of rhetoric that Marx identifies as the Bonapartist master over the peasantry. It's weird.
It's profoundly weird. And maybe this is why it's so hard to use the Bonapartist category well. There's a lot packed in here that like describes it describes a phenomenon, and it points to like a kind of relation that kind of spins out of control that you can see, and it's one of the manifold ways that capitalist political life can develop. But even when situated in peasant class interest, like it often does not pan out this way. And I guess Marx is pointing to Bonaparte like actually destroying the peasantry in the name of the peasantry. So there is that.
Yes. Yep. And yeah, I mean, okay, so I think where we end, like, I think that McNair's argument about the need for forced proletarianization as a way out of the Bolshevik dilemma still holds, right? Like, that idea of, like, okay, you don't have a developed economy, you don't have a politically developed proletariat, and the mass of people are peasants, and you are in a situation of immense political danger. There is a logic that flows out of that to doing the Stalinist forced proletarianization through mass violence, right? Like, that still makes sense. If you are Stalin and you are trying to act out of self-preservation, like, that still makes sense as a strategy.
Yeah, I like the logic flows. It's a pretty ugly logic.
It's very cynical.
Yeah, no, it's totally cynical, and I don't know. There is something to that, but I guess the real question is, on like the proletarian side of this equation, did the proletariat end up in the 20th century better able to do political organization in a way that it doesn't end up in it similarly, I guess. And I don't know. I can't give an unequivocal answer to the degree I'd like to.
I feel like there's so much stuff that flows into the ability of the proletariat to self-govern that actually has to do with like educational resources and not really what happens on the job site. Like,
right.
When we
bourgeois society.
Yeah, like when we see the proletariat today as being able to self-govern, like when we envision that possible future, a lot of it has to do with like, yeah, there's like tons of multifariousness of talent that is fostered by the education system, which is like, real. And there is like a kind of potential energy there, which we could all see. It's just, it doesn't really come out of the work site.
Yeah, then it's ground to fucking dust on the job market, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's, there's so much to chew on and think about here. Like, it's hard for me to summarize everything that we've kind of touched on with regards to these class relations. I'm glad we're going to be reading a book about class after this. Tom, you need to save this table for that discussion.
Oh, yeah.
Well, like, honestly, I think there needs to be the table needs to be a bit bigger. It needs like a peasants then, a peasants now, a proles now, and a proles then. And then it needs like,
there are a lot of leftist academics who are 100% tied to the cause of peasants now. So
this is true.
Yeah.
And we also need then like decreasing tendency or increasing tendency as well. So if we can put on our 11-dimensional glasses, we should be fine. We'll sort it out.
All right, great.
Okay. Good.
Can we read some of this? I fear I have a bad thing to tell you. we're not going to get all this chapter done today.
Yeah, that's fine, but let's keep it moving.
Tom, I need it
We
as soon
haven't
as I
even
saw the
started.
fucking table.
We haven't even started. Fuck's sake! Right? Okay, an hour and a half. This is officially the worst one we've ever done.
I saw the table. I knew the table. I saw the table. I said it. I said it out loud.
Who wants to read the first one? Kyle, how do you feel? Or are you talked out?
Sure, let's go. All right.
From historical down to revolutionary.
Yep. Historical tradition gave rise to the French peasants' belief in the miracle that a man named Napoleon would bring all glory back to them. And there turned up an individual who claims to be that man because he bears the name Napoleon, in consequence of the Code Napoleon, which decrees inquiry into paternity is forbidden. That good old Napoleonic misogyny. After a 20-year vagabondage and a series of grotesque adventures, the legend is consummated, and the man becomes emperor of the French. The fixed idea of the nephew was realized because it coincided with the fixed idea of the most numerous class of the French people. But, it may be objected, what about the peasant uprisings in half of France? The raids of the army on the peasants? The mass incarceration and transportation of the peasants? Since Louis XIV, France has experienced no similar persecution of the peasants on account of demagogic agitation. But let us not misunderstand. The Bonaparte dynasty represents not the revolutionary, but the conservative peasant. Not the peasant who strikes out beyond the condition of his social existence, the small holding, but rather one who wants to consolidate his holding. Not the country folk who in alliance with the towns want to overthrow the old order through their own energies, but on the contrary, those who in solid seclusion within this old order want to see themselves and their small holdings saved and favored by the ghost of the empire. It represents not the enlightenment, but the superstition of the peasant, not his judgment, but his prejudice, not his future, but his past, not his modern Cevennes, a peasant uprising in the Cevennes Mountains in 1702 to 1705, but his modern Vendée. I think we all know what the Vendée is. The 3 years stern rule of the parliamentary republic freed a part of the French peasants from the Napoleonic illusion and revolutionized them, even though superficially. But the bourgeoisie violently repulsed them as often as they set themselves in motion. Under the parliamentary republic, the modern and the traditional consciousness of the French peasant contended for mastery. The process took the form of an incessant struggle between the schoolmasters and the priests. The bourgeoisie struck down the schoolmasters. The peasants for the first time made efforts to behave independently vis-a-vis the government. This was shown in the continual conflict between the mayors and the prefects. The bourgeoisie deposed the mayors. Finally, during the period of the parliamentary republic, the peasants of different localities rose against their own offspring, the army. The bourgeoisie punished these peasants with sieges and executions. And this same bourgeoisie now cries out against the stupidity of the masses, the vile multitude that betrayed it to Bonaparte. The bourgeoisie itself has violently strengthened the imperialism of the peasant class. It has preserved the conditions that form the birthplaces of this species of peasant religion. The bourgeoisie, in truth, is bound to fear the stupidity of the masses so long as they remain conservative, and the insight of the masses as soon as they become revolutionary. This here, to me, is some pretty heavy support for the Bolshevik/Stalinist line about the peasantry.
Well, it's not even just the Bolshevik/Stalinist line. This, really complicates the image of Marx being for the industrial proletariat and, the Bakuninists and Mao and, everyone else being for the peasantry, and that Marx just thought that the peasantry was a sack of potatoes. Like, despite the fact that he thinks this and that about the ideal average of the class interest or whatever, like all the things that we are going through on that checklist, Marx has a sense of political contingency that, like, can flower beyond the class interest. It's very clear.
Yeah.
And that this isn't like a schizoid manner of thinking where he's just jamming together ideas that don't hang together. Or at least I don't believe so. I think he's pulling out, what we could look at as some sort of like abstract, like rational choice matrix, and then throwing, a sort of like cultural historical look at how people can look beyond that, naked, narrow class interest, or how they could be suckered into a reactionary project.
Yeah, and I think what Marx is kind of saying here is that this revolutionary side of the peasantry is the side of the peasantry that is trying to get beyond their peasantness.
Yes. Right.
And the conservative one is the one that is trying to remain as peasants.
Even though they more or less cannot.
Yeah. But like, it float like in the previous description where he's describing the peasant class interest, that really applies to the peasants who are trying to remain peasants.
Yeah.
And this is the revolutionary side is the one that is like, well, we don't really know what's going to come after this for us, but we are on the side of enlightenment and alliance with the cities.
Yeah, and perhaps like if we were to take this into naked political economic terms, like maybe they think that it's a rational bet that they're going to end up getting more by throwing their lot in with the proletariat in a revolutionary fashion than they will be able to trying to hold on to a form that's being constantly undermined.
It reminds me a lot of the distinction that Lenin draws between the peasant and the farmer. Like, as in the farmer is someone who makes use of science, is on the side of enlightenment, it basically sees the interest and the value of revolutionizing the countryside. Now, when you look at what he's drawing on the example of the American farmer. So, like, that's an example of settler colonialism, which may not actually apply. That may not actually apply to this case at all. But it is the kind of vision that Lenin had in mind for, like, what the countryside might end up becoming. It's the kind of people that my dad used to work for as, like, kind of like doing agricultural annex work as a government scientist.
Right.
Large, nearly bourgeois farmers.
No.
What do you mean?
No.
Sorry,
The kind of people that my dad was working for were a kind of transition form. They were people who had taken or bought or received land from the government through the process of settler colonialism, and were basically smallholders, but were operating with the assistance of government science and support in order to create a new productive form that was distinct from the old traditional ones. And those people have largely ceased to exist at this point. They've become like the because of free trade with America and because of the withdrawal of government support, like, they've largely sold their farms to big bourgeois farm interests. But it was a transitional form that existed, in which my father's job was set up to support, and it wasn't big bourgeois farming, because, like, really in the end, my dad didn't have much of any relevance to that form of farming. And the sorts of people he worked with, their jobs were cut because we were transitioning to a big bourgeois / corporate form of agriculture.
Tom, I might eat my words here, but if we only have like maybe like 3 more chunks like that left, if we're sort of expedient and rely on the previous conversation to sort of flesh out a lot of our points, we might be able to finish this today.
Okay, fuck me. You're because I'm kind of waning at the moment. So let's go for the next one. We'll see what we do.
Yeah, let me. Did you read in the uprisings after the coup d'état?
That's where we're at in the uprisings.
Yeah, we don't need to
Okay.
read that bit. I don't think you need
Okay.
that little bit. That's a bit kind of superfluous. So the next one is after the first revolution. Those two.
Sure.
This is a big one.
Yeah. All right. After the first revolution had transformed the semi-feudal peasants into freeholders, Napoleon confirmed and regulated the conditions in which they could exploit undisturbed the soil of France, which they had only just acquired, and could slake their youthful passion for property. But what is now ruining the French peasant is his small holding itself, the division of the land and the soil, the property form which Napoleon consolidated in France. It is exactly these material conditions which made the feudal peasant a small holding peasant and Napoleon an emperor. 2 generations sufficed to produce the unavoidable result: progressive deterioration of agriculture and progressive indebtedness of the agriculturist. The Napoleonic property form, which at the beginning of the 19th century was the condition of the emancipation and enrichment of the French country folk, has developed in the course of this century into the law of their enslavement and their pauperism. And just this law is the first of the Napoleonic ideas, which the second Bonaparte has to uphold. If he still shares with the peasants the illusion that the cause of their ruin is to be sought not in the small holdings themselves, but outside them, in the influence of secondary circumstances, his experiments will shatter like soap bubbles when they come into contact with the relations of production. The economic development of small holding property has radically changed the peasants' relations with the other social classes. Under Napoleon, the fragmentation of the land in the countryside supplemented free competition and the beginning of big industry in the towns. The peasant class was the ubiquitous protest against the recently overthrown landed aristocracy. The roots that small holding property struck in French soil deprived feudalism of all nourishment. The landmarks of this property formed the natural fortification of the bourgeoisie against any surprise attack by its old overlords. But in the course of the 19th century, the urban usurer replaced the feudal one, the mortgage replaced the feudal obligation, bourgeois capital replaced aristocratic landed property. The peasant's small holding is now the only pretext that allows the capitalist to draw profits, interest, and rent from the soil, while leaving it to the agriculturalist himself to see to it how he can extract his wages. The mortgage debt burdening the soil of France imposes on the French peasantry an amount of interest equal to the annual interest on the entire British national debt. Smallholding property in this enslavement by capital, towards which its development pushes it unavoidably, has transformed the mass of the French nation into troglodytes. Neat. 16 million peasants, including women and children, dwell in caves, a large number of which have but one opening, others 2, and the most favored only 3. Windows are to a house what the 5 senses are to a head. The bourgeois order, which at the beginning of the century set the state to stand guard over the newly emerged small holdings and fertilize them with laurels, has become a vampire which sucks from their hearts and brains and casts them into the alchemist's cauldron of capital. The Code Napoleon is now nothing but the codex of distraints, of forced sales and compulsory auctions. To the 4 million, including children, etc., officially recognized paupers, vagabonds, criminals, and prostitutes in France, must be added another 5 million who hover on the margin of existence and either have their haunts in the countryside itself or with their rags and their children continually desert the countryside for the towns and the towns for the countryside. Therefore, the interests of the peasants are no longer, as under Napoleon, in accord with, but are now in opposition to, bourgeois interests to capital. Hence, they find their natural ally and leader in the urban proletariat, whose task it is to overthrow the bourgeois order. But strong and unlimited government, and this is the second Napoleonic idea that the second Napoleon has to carry out, is called upon to defend this material order by force. This material order also serves, in all Bonaparte's proclamations, as the slogan against the rebellious peasants. I mean, Kyle, I just see a lot more fuel for, what you're saying here about the alliance between the proletariat and the peasantry, kind of against this like Trotskyist sort of read where, there is no role for the peasantry to play and all of the backwardsness can be blamed on the peasants. That Marx was really, and you see this in Marx throughout, that he is actually in favor of class coalitions, of class coalitions in the proletarian interest, right? Like as long as it can still be steered by the proletarian interests, he's not against coalitions with the petty bourgeoisie, he's not against coalitions with the peasants. He expects there to be forward-thinking elements within other classes, within their ranks, and he just does not see consciousness going one-to-one with class interests. And if he did, his entire project would be in ruins and incoherent. It's just like a really bad way of reading Marx.
Right. So I do have another point to bring up here. How much does this situation that Marx describes with like the Napoleonic land reform leading to impoverishment correspond to the situation in America with the idea of everyone being a homeowner now leading to just mass pauperization and like this same kind of dispossession? Like, is it a kind of analogous outcome?
Well, I can't get that out of my head when I read it. That is the substitution that I often make, and maybe it's a sort of presentist mistake, Kyle, but I absolutely do see it that way. That it's the attack on the middle class, and it is by the same forces that propped up the middle class, and it is ultimately for the same like ultimate long-term reasons, but the political calculus has changed against the favor of bolstering smallholding property, for settler colonial reasons, for, post-war compromise reasons. That the conditions for that calculus have faded, and you now have an attack on those people. And that's essentially what leaves the national narrative, and especially the sort of liberals, in complete disarray. They just have no point of reference for understanding what's going on. And I mean liberals quite broadly.
In the Clinton era, they sort of doubled down on the idea of putting this small property holder republic into overdrive, right? Like through an alliance with finance to just like extend it to the broadest extent possible. And then that started all this disintegration.
But it's the same, like, I think obviously the American small farm holders have definitely gone the way of the French farm holders that he's said here. But like, I think it's
for sure.
Like if you look at the structure of the housing market, I think like post-war, there seemed to have been like, limits. Certainly I know in Ireland and England, there was limits on the amount of money that you could, like the amount of money you could get for a mortgage was tied to like 3 times your wages. But like this necessity for capital to be able to get large profits, you can't get it in production here, but you can get it in speculation here. And the banks always go for speculative fucking gains. It's quicker. And so like, I think that natural kind of nearly like this same thing has kind of happened, I would say, Kyle, as in like these small holders, they own their property, did they not, in France here? By the way, and they ended up getting indebted, like in a lot of like I suppose as a class, the proletariat in most Western countries probably owned, if you go back 50 years ago, they probably owned their houses. Is that a fair comment?
Yes,
so.
with like sort
Or
of minor exceptions like Germany, uh, to a considerable extent Japan.
maybe Austria, I
Uh,
think maybe as well.
yeah, but in many, yeah, Austria is another one. You're right. But in most countries, I would say that home ownership was quite high in the post-war compromise.
Yeah, and even so, like home ownership is it's probably very important in those countries. I don't mean to undersell that, but in the United States, home ownership was the linchpin of the post-war compromise in an even more pronounced way. I don't know, maybe I'm inflating this because of my bias of being American and
No,
seeing it
you're
up
right.
close.
You're right.
But I think yeah, like it is it's like, and this is actually a dynamic that Engels was very perceptive about. And Marx was always more sanguine about the United States than Engels, because I think Engels understood the implications of this for what the limits of the labor movement here. And yeah, I mean, obviously, if we're going to talk about like farmers in the United States, yeah, this dynamic is like way far gone and
It's
pretty
50
much
years.
impossible.
Yeah, 70 years ago.
Yeah, right. But like to abstract this a bit and to make this a little more about the Marxian dynamic of class polarization, which, in the literature, people have been very like, haha, well, we see now that there's no class polarization in capitalism. Even sort of like the more responsible, like, I don't know, analytical Marxists, until recently, like, have been, would say things like that, oh, it's so much more complicated than class polarization. And well, they might be right to a degree. Like, the ultimate tendency is to liquidate these medium forms. I think it's just so hard not to look at. It's just so hard to look at the overall dynamics of the economy and the way that the housing market crash just essentially destroyed the American like middle class, like the American like class compromise, and beyond the point of just like allowing like expanding the realm of whiteness or like allowing minorities to buy into it or whatever, like the 2007 and through 8 like financial and housing crash, the effects of that are still not really registered in the American psyche. And that like not only is the expanding standards of living over, but the entire frame of reference for the like American political situation is gone. And so like when reading this stuff, it is hard not to see. It's hard not to like read our present situation into that, and that there are. And I don't know if I could even be as sanguine as Marx is about the peasantry in terms of the the middle class that feels itself being liquidated and is looking towards the proletariat as it's like for leadership or something. Like maybe the main thing about the middle class is like liquidated property is that it still sees itself as the master of the proletariat and trying to desperately grasp at the reins and maintain moral order, because the sort of petty bourgeois are supposed to be like the moral exemplars of the proletariat, and they can't like let go of that self-image in their descent into proletarianization.
Well, yeah, but the home ownership went far broader than the petty bourgeoisie. It was,
No,
it was,
you're quite right. You're quite right about that.
And it's going to push the kind of richer pros, maybe skilled pros down. That what it will mean is that like house prices got smashed, they lose them, but house prices come back up and then they can't get back on the ladder. People's kids can't get on the ladder. You're going to a state of home ownership. Over 70, 80 years, it'll go to a state of rentership, and that's the key dynamic. Like for proles here, that maps from like a land owning to basically, not having the land. we're going to be going to a renting proletariat. I think it's definitely on the increase.
Oh no, that's absolutely it's to a large extent people either living in with relatives who still have homes or renting is the overwhelming tendency.
Yeah.
And that even that ability to live with where your folks are, whatever, like most people, their folks' house doesn't get them close to where they work. It's not a solution. It's not a systemic solution.
No.
Class solution.
The other thing I want to bring up here is this relationship, like the Napoleon who creates the petty property, and then the Napoleon who is forced to turn against it, or against those who are dispossessed. Like, we've been talking about the 18th Brumaire of Joe Biden. Is this the position that the Democrats are in now?
Yes.
Yeah.
They created the petty proprietor republic, and now as it falls apart, they are forced into this law and order position in opposition to those who are dispossessed.
Yeah, I think that is exactly where they end up being. And I mean, we could talk about the class forces abstracted from each of the parties or whatever, because, if you really think about the grand sweep of the Democratic Party, it's sort of abstracted from the industrial bourgeois that supported the Republicans or whatever. There's always been more of a sort of, I don't know. How would you describe the split between, like the long-term trends in Democrats and Republicans? It's complicated because the parties sort of switch sides, but there's like a substrate that like retains itself. But yeah, ultimately, like, especially the Democrats that like bolstered like redlining and bolstered, the racial elements of the post-war welfare state, like there is a big turn against, like.
Mm-hmm. Even though it's basically the negative effect on property values of having black people move into your neighborhood is now worse than ever,
Wow.
which is really, it just makes you despair when you think about that.
It does point to this entire way of life being like against, like, not just like the class interests of the proletariat, but like the values of the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Or the values of humanism beyond the Enlightenment, because I guess really the values of the Enlightenment are
the values of Enlightenment are totally consistent with
property values going down when
and racial segregation in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
don't know if they're totally consistent, but politically speaking, and in terms of what the Enlightenment did, that's the foundation of that shit.
There's always a split between, the actual political projects that the Enlightenment is tied to and the humanist spirit that is, played out through French history, especially. You know what I mean? Like the universalist ideas that ended up getting like a really bad reputation in the United States because they had to make a pact with slaveholders, are certainly not compatible with this way of life, really.
All right, shall we continue on?
Yeah, let's do the next bit. I'll read this bit, sure. Keep me awake.
There we go.
Sorry, no, I am struggling here, so that's why I'm not contributing as much. So apologies.
Sorry, Tom.
In addition to the mortgage which capital imposes on it, the small holding is burdened by taxes. Taxes are the life source of the bureaucracy, the army, the priests, and the court. In short, of the entire apparatus of the executive power. Strong government and heavy taxes are identical. By its very nature, small... Did I say small government? Did I get that right?
Well, no, I thought you said it right. It's just such a funny thing for Marx to say. Anyway.
Okay, sorry. By its very nature, Smallholding property forms a basis for an all-powerful and numberless bureaucracy. It creates a uniform level of personal and economic relationships over the whole extent of the country. Hence, it also permits uniform action from a supreme centre on all points of this uniform mass. It destroys the aristocratic immediate steps between the mass of the people and the power of the state. On all sides, therefore, it calls forth the direct intrusion of this state power and the interposition of its immediate organs. Finally, it produces an unemployed surplus population which can find no place either on the land or in the towns, and which perforce reaches out for state offices as a sort of respectable alms and provokes the creation of additional state positions. By the new markets which he opened with bayonets, and by the plundering of the continent, Napoleon repaid the compulsory taxes with interest. These taxes were a spur to the industry of the peasant, whereas now they rob his industry of its last resources and complete his defenselessness against pauperism. An enormous bureaucracy, well gallooned and well fed, is the Napoleonic idea, which is most congenial to the second Bonaparte. How could it be otherwise, considering that alongside the actual classes of society, he is forced to create an artificial caste for which the maintenance of his regime becomes a bread and butter question. Hence, one of his first financial operations was the raising of official salaries to their old level and the creation of new sinecures.
Oh my. This is so interesting. You know, it's incredible. I love it because it's saying something very interesting in relation to sort of like contemporary American society, right? Like,
yeah,
the sort of Trumpites, the petty proprietors who hate quote unquote big government, like their form of property is actually the precondition for its existence. Like it is the smallholding property is the basis of big government, according to Marx here.
But this is something,
which makes sense because the big bourgeoisie can actually defend itself from taxation, whereas small property, they can't.
Yeah, Marx gets so many dynamics right here. It's kind of funny because on the one hand, a libertarian would love, a right libertarian, would love the sentence strong government and heavy taxes are identical, but then just shit himself over the next sentences. Like that, like far from being the guarantor of democracy and the check on the big state, this small proprietorship is the condition for the big state to really like rule the roost. And perhaps, some conditions of the Soviet Union where the government owns like fucking all industries or something, or, a great deal, could be the counterexample. But like in general, you don't actually see small property holding being this like virtuous, classical form of like, I don't know, liberty protection. You do see it create a surplus population that calls out for more state spending. Because, small proprietorship, but that's not going to include everybody. That's impossible. That's kind of the point of small proprietorship, is to not include everyone.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because it's like, it makes sense the way that like the weird dual consciousness of the small proprietors, where they hate big government
but love the military is very much explained in this description of how the first Napoleon actually benefited the small proprietor through the use of taxes.
That's very interesting, Kyle. Yeah. So this the society, these small propriety holders benefit from the imperial surplus, so they like the military.
Yeah, there's at least the possibility they will benefit. It like there is a tantalizing hope that they will see gains from the use of the military through imperialism, even if they don't always see it. It's like, yeah, like there's a logic there.
Yeah, this gets the small proprietor relationship to what would eventually become like military Keynesianism, which would become, chartalism for Hitler's policy, and, what would become like the, World War II full mobilization kind of spending. It's fucking fascinating.
It's basically right there. By the new markets which he opened with bayonets and by the plundering of the continent, Napoleon repaid the compulsory taxes with interest. These taxes were a spur to the industry of the peasant, where now they rob his industry of his last resources and complete his defenselessness against pauperism. Even that bit.
Well, yeah, because
the military now is like it's a leech. It's a leech on society now, it seems.
Yeah, and it's one of the biggest tax expenditures, and yeah, you do really see like something like this, middle class tax burden. This was like a big progressive like talking point. But like, yeah, like the way that, if you're doing property taxes, they will, disproportionately affect the people with the least property and, force them out of that realm. So, I mean, like, without like shedding too many tears about that, the small proprietors, again, this is a tendency towards class polarization.
And the Republican versus Democratic politics are the politics of the small proprietors versus the politics of the people who are on the state payroll. Pretty much. And that's where that political contradiction comes out. And it's very interesting, with the thing like, oh, Trump doesn't pay tax, right? And it's like, well, for the liberals and for the Democrats, it's like, like he doesn't pay tax. That's not contributing to society. It's an embarrassment. But you can kind of understand how for the petty proprietors, it's like,
what a hero.
Man, like, I wish I didn't have to pay that tax.
Yeah, like
Trump doing it for the boys.
Yeah. They say death and taxes is inevitable, but God damn it, you might succumb to COVID, but you're not paying taxes.
Yeah. For Donald Trump, only one thing in life is inevitable: death via COVID.
He got out of one of those boxes, so he's a real hero.
But
no, it's fascinating because this paragraph really is illuminating as to like what the actual political dynamic is in America. Like it maps on very strongly with what Marx is describing here.
Yeah, and I don't know how much farther we want to get into this. I feel like we're putting Tom at bayonet point here.
No, I'm living again. I'm getting the second wind.
All right. Because there's there's a little bit on secularization here that I don't know if it's like important enough to read, but there is just this little bit that's like, heaven was a quite pleasing addition to the narrow strip of land just won, especially as it makes the weather. It becomes an insult as soon as it is thrust forward as a substitute for the small holding. It does kind of like track with secularization in the United States accompanying this like this loss of the small property holder.
Yeah, let's read this because this is kind of incredible. Like,
okay,
yeah. Do you want to read it there, Esri?
Yeah, I got it. Another Napoleonic idea is the domination of the priests as an instrument of government. But while at the time of their emergence, the small holding owners, in accord with society and their dependence on natural forces and submission to the authority which protected them from above, were naturally religious, now that they are ruined by debts, at odds with society at odds with society and authority, and driven beyond their own limitations, they had become naturally irreligious. Heaven was quite a pleasing addition to the narrow strip of land just won, especially as it makes the weather. It becomes an insult as soon as it is thrust forward as a substitute for the small holding. The priest then appears only as the anointed bloodhound of the earthly police, another Napoleonic idea. The expedition against Rome will take place in France itself next time, but in a sense, opposite from that of Monsieur de Montalembert.
Yeah. So I think this is a little bit more complicated if we want to look at the American example, right? Because
certainly
the secularization actually starts at the height of petty property.
Yes, this is true. Yeah.
During the exposure to the state universities, and the boomers, right? The boomers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's when it really accelerates. Like,
I think you may actually be able to kind of extend this sort of logic, though, in terms of, like, maybe not the priesthood, quote unquote, because obviously, like, that's not a super major political force in America, but maybe like the NGO sector, something like that. Like
perhaps.
that are doing like the old job of the Catholic Church.
That's maybe like a more grounded read than what I was looking at. I was just sort of thinking about the influence of evangelicals in policy and in politics, because like we said earlier, Trump dying of COVID is the last chance for evangelicals to have an evangelical president. Like, right. That's, the old days of the moral majority are gone. What is most striking about a lot of the alt-right to a lot of people is that they are post-religious. They would troll conservatives by, posting pictures of aborted fetuses and that sort of thing. That's a pretty new phenomenon in American politics, to be openly nihilistic instead of, using Christianity as a shield for all the oppressive politics that you have. So in that respect, like, the crisis, like, brought out the irreligious right in a way that you haven't seen.
I think what you see with the boomers is that a portion of them go into evangelical Christianity, right, as like a reaction to the 60s.
Yes.
And a portion of them go into the NGO complex, like this kind of idea of like neoliberal civil society theory, right?
Okay.
Like that sort of captures their aspirations spiritually. And I think honestly both of them are degenerating at this point in time of disenfranchisement.
I think that's right. Certainly the nonprofits as an instrument of government have become like less there's like less social trust in them, and they've become like less useful.
But the point I was kind of thinking here, I don't know if you've covered it there, I just had to go to step out for a second, was along the lines of like the fairly recent like graphs for like those who consider themselves non-religious in the US has been like going up at, I think, nearly like a 1 percentage point a year or something for like 10 or 12 years, that it's up to like something like 20% now, or 25%. I can't remember the exact stats. Do you know them, Esri?
I don't know the exact stats, but I was something of a new atheist adjacent person 10 years ago. So I was kind of aware when this phenomenon was beginning and quite happy about it.
And it's still ongoing. The last one I saw was this year or last year, and the trend is still like a line. It's just going straight up. And that would track with like this idea of the destruction of the peasant small holding, if we want to make that analogy we had for the
petty proprietor.
But like not even just petty
proprietor is the small property holder. It's hard to make an abstraction between like means
Yeah.
of production holder and someone that like owns where they live, you know,
But,
there's
like what we were saying, like
it
that
still
there's
means a
something.
production. It still
Yeah.
means a production. It's just it's a very small one compared to the overall.
but for a lot of like proletarians, like where they live, isn't there like
Oh yeah,
it doesn't
That's
have anything
true.
to do
That's
with
true.
production, but it does have a sort of ideological impact in feeling like you have a stake in society and feeling like a property holder. It gives you a sense of that you have an interest in small property holdings, which, you know, a lot of proletarians just don't on the job. Like, like that's just not true in terms of their employment relations, but like they can come home to their own castle, and that means something to them.
Yeah,
and
like
I guess I just have too much COVID brain because for a lot of people right now, you know,
that makes sense.
They're working from home, so it actually is means of production.
That does make sense. But you know, that is. We'll see if that's like a lasting achievement of the COVID revolution. You know,
it will be. Don't you bet on it? Do bet on it. I mean, I don't know. Shut up, Tom. But like, so there, like, so I map that like this destruction of the ability to be a householder and not having a key in a key feeling like you have a position within this society is leading like to this irreligious phenomenon in America. It seems to map pretty well to what they've just talked about here. Like that while the farmers were driven to become kind of proles or whatever you want to say in America, they still had that that, what did he call it in the previous the markets he opened with bayonets and the plundering of the continent. Napoleon repaid the compulsory taxes with interest. They still had that boom from the US empire in the 50s, 60s, 70s that doesn't seem to be there anymore, as services in the country and bridges are getting into, you know, disrepair and the military is bloated. That, like, it seems to map pretty well to me. I was that was something I didn't pick up reading it the first two times.
Yeah, especially in regards with you know, military adventurism, which, you know, the last real big adventure has of course ended in disaster for the United States. But like, I don't know. I mean, I suppose there are other like you know, American excursions, but the Iraq War really being sort of a capstone on American like unilateral entanglement in the affairs of the world, and just like projecting its influence, so often, you know, against the cries of its allies, being like, wait. Except not our good friend Tony Blair.
Nope. My friend waited. Tony Blair went to Dublin to like sign his book. He was in one of the like the big bookshops, and he got up early on a Saturday morning and he queued and he wore a suit and he looked all like nerdy or whatever. And when he got up to Tony Blair, I don't know if he like spat in his face or threw blood on his face, did something. Like, I didn't know my name. He was totally hero. I didn't know.
Best reason to wear a suit.
Yeah, I was so surprised. He said, "Oh, I did that," and I was like, "You did what?" I never knew he would do something like that. It was very surprising. You're like, he wasn't an activist or anything. He just went, "Fuck Tony Blair, I'm going to get him."
Wow, what a conscientious human being.
It's fucking brilliant. Yeah. Right, Esri, do you want to take this monster section? I think if we do this monster section.
I could do it because Ezra just read, but
yeah. I think this looks like a job for Kyle.
Okay. Let's go. So we're from finally down to uncle. Okay. Finally, the culminating idée Napoléon is the ascendancy of the army. The army was the point d'honneur of the smallholding peasants.
It was they themselves transformed into heroes, defending their new possessions against the outer world, glorifying their recently won nationhood, plundering and revolutionizing the world. The uniform was their own state costume. War was their poetry. The small holding, enlarged and rounded off in imagination, was their fatherland. And patriotism, the ideal form of the sense of property. But the enemies whom the French peasant now has to defend his property against are not the Cossacks. They are the hussiers, the bailiffs, and the tax collectors. The small holding no longer lies in the so-called fatherland, but in the registry of mortgages. The army itself is no longer the flower of the peasant youth. It is the swamp flower of the peasant lumpen proletariat. It consists largely of replacements, of substitutes, just as the second Bonaparte is himself only a replacement, the substitute for Napoleon. It now performs its deeds of valor by hounding the peasants in masses like chamois, by doing gendarme duty. And if the natural contradictions of his system chase the chief of the Society of December the 10th across the French border, his army, after some acts of brigandage, will reap not laurels, but thrashings. Well, that was prophetic. It is clear, all idées Napoléennes are ideas of the undeveloped small holding in the freshness of its youth. They are a contradiction to the outlived holdings. They are only the hallucinations of its death struggle, words transformed into phrases, spirits transformed into ghosts. But the parody of imperialism was necessary to free the mass of the French nation from the weight of tradition, and to work out in pure form the opposition between state power and society. With the progressive deterioration of smallholding property, the state structure erected upon it collapses. The centralization of the state that modern society requires arises only on the ruins of the military bureaucratic government machinery which was forged in opposition to feudalism. The condition of the French peasants provides us with the answer to the riddle of the general elections of December the 20th and 21st, which bore the second Bonaparte up Mount Sinai, not to receive laws, but to give them. Obviously, the bourgeoisie now had no choice but to elect Bonaparte. When the Puritans of the Council of Constance, 1414 to 18, complained of the dissolute lives of the popes and wailed about the necessity for moral reform, Cardinal Pierre Daly thundered at them. Only the devil in person can still save the Catholic Church, and you ask for angels. Similarly, after the coup d'etat, the French bourgeoisie cried out, only the chief of the Society of December the 10th can still save bourgeois society. Only theft can still save property. Only perjury religion. Bastardy the family. Disorder order. As the executive authority which has made itself independent, Bonaparte feels it to be his task to safeguard bourgeois order. But the strength of this bourgeois order lies in the middle class. He poses, therefore, as the representative of the middle class and issues decrees in this sense. Nevertheless, he is somebody solely because he has broken the power of that middle class and keeps on breaking it daily. Middle class here means bourgeoisie. He poses, therefore, as the opponent of the political and literary power of the middle class. But by protecting its material power, he revives its political power. Thus, the cause must be kept alive, but the effect where it manifests itself must be done away with. But this cannot happen without small confusions of cause and effect, since in their interaction, both lose their distinguishing marks. New decrees obliterate the borderline. Bonaparte knows how to pose at the same time as the representative of the peasants and of the people in general, as a man who wants to make the lower classes happy with the framework of bourgeois society. New decrees cheat the true socialists, quote unquote, of their governmental skill in advance. But above all, Bonaparte knows how to pose as the chief of society of December the 10th, as the representative of the lumpen proletariat to which he himself, his entourage, his government, and his army belong, and whose main object is to benefit itself and draw California lottery prizes from the state treasury. And he confirms himself as chief of the Society of December the 10th with decrees, without decrees, and despite decrees. This contradictory task of the man explains the contradictions of his government. The confused groping which tries now to win, now to humiliate, first one class and then another, and uniformly arrays all of them against him, whose uncertainty in practice forms a highly comical contrast to the imperious categorical style of the government decrees, a style slavishly copied from the uncle.
Wow, there's a lot in there. That was too much. We shouldn't have given you all that to read there, Carl. That was too much.
Yeah, but he did it with such grace and style. I mean, I don't know. How could I miss it? Come on.
Yeah, very good. So first here, like the stuff about the relationship of the army to the French peasant.
It's amazing. So good.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. Like, especially like this one you see, Kyle, where he says like that if they actually go and chase Napoleon across the border in a battle, they'll get their ass handed to them.
Man.
Bismarck is waiting in the wings.
You got what I need. Yeah. No, that's a direct prediction, and it was 100% right.
100% right. The most shambolic defeat of like the 19th century. Just comical. Right up to the emperor himself being captured on the battlefield. My God.
What do we think about like the American army's inability to win wars with respect to this?
That is the echo in my head here of the parody of imperialism, where we go in, we overthrow a Ba'athist and create ISIS.
Yeah, well, and also, like, people are increasingly saying how much the U.S. military is becoming a paper tiger.
Yeah.
Extremely expensive, but also very inadequate at fighting wars. Especially with its outdated arsenal and how like drone warfare is going to completely revolutionize warfare in general going forward. But I do like this. This original point about the point d'honneur, about the peasants transformed into heroes and so on. It reminds me a lot of watching the Sharps Rifles series, with what's his name now? The guy who dies in everything, Sean Bean.
I don't know about this. Talk to me.
So this is a series of kind of like boys own-ish, rah, rule Britannia, historical fiction that was written about the Napoleonic Wars, and which centers around a rifleman who is of a low-class origin and has to grapple with the realities of the British military while fighting Napoleon. So it's that kind of thing of like, he is presented as a sort of like new British man who can get beyond the decadence of aristocracy, but also like upholds the yeoman virtues of Englishness in opposition to the French. But when you watch the injustices of the aristocratic system and the injustices of British class society are on full display in that series. And when you watch it, you almost kind of wonder to yourself, like, is he on the wrong side here? Like, and his like the final episode, which is about the Battle of Waterloo. Well, there's a really bad one where he goes to India later, but the actual last episode of the series, which is about the Battle of Waterloo, he he's not really motivated ideologically to fight Napoleon. And his big moment in the show is like when he actually gets to see Napoleon on horseback, and he's like, wow, I actually saw Napoleon. That's amazing. Like, this is really strange ambiguity in relationship to Britain. Whereas I feel like for the French peasantry, it's a much less ambiguous relationship, and they could see themselves as heroes for the cause. Whereas for Sharp, it was very much like, I'm a hero despite the society I live in. So yeah, this is just really a really interesting point that Marx brings up here.
Yeah, and in the same breath, you know, the small holding no longer lies in the so-called fatherland, but in the registry of mortgages. The army is no longer the flower of the peasant youth; it is a swamp flower, the peasant lumpen proletarian. I mean, you know, leaving peasant aside, like this could very well describe the changing relationship between army and society in vastly different circumstances in the United States as the, you know, and really that's a dynamic that started to change far before this change in property holding, you know, perhaps like, you know, 40 years before. But yeah, you know, the correlation's unmistakable.
It's really the trauma of Vietnam is this trauma, right?
Yes, exactly.
Have you seen I saw like a TikTok or something on Twitter of like done by some US Army. It what's the lowest level in the US Army? What would you call them?
I don't know, cadet. That's Starfleet. I'm not sure.
Kyle.
It's a private, right?
Private, yeah. I would say they're all private. And there's somebody behind the camera is going, he goes up to like, you know, another private. He goes, why did you join the US Army? And the guy looks at him like dead-eyed and he goes, fuck off. And then it goes to another one. Why did you join? You know, like, just these are all different. Why did you join the US Army? It's like, I've fucking no idea. Fuck this. And it's like, he just asked like about 20 people in a row and they're all just looking like, fucking no idea, man.
Oh, that's brutal. That's wow.
Like it did hit me. I could imagine that is actually what the fucking life is. They all look like they were bureaucratized to their fucking ass and just like dickheads talking to them all the time. And just they're all poor and they're only doing it because they're broke and they want to go to college. And it's like, fuck this. I hope we don't go to a war. There's a load of shit. I don't want to die killing some Yemenis poor bastard. You know. That's the vibe you just got off all of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only people I knew that actively considered going to the army were people that are really shit out of luck, you know? Like, that were like, had trouble holding down a job and were pretty desperate. That's, you know.
I know people who consider joining the U.S. military for idealistic reasons, but they didn't actually do it, so. You know, that says something.
I love those. I love those type. Yeah, I could if I wanted it, but my little finger had slight bit of arthritis in it. You know.
Yeah. Those are the reasons people go to West Point, not like enlist.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, there's a bit here. Then I wanted to.
About the centralization of the state and the parody of imperialism. Is that the one?
Yeah, these two lines here. But the parody of imperialism. So this is the parody of trying it out the second time that, you know, with Napoleon III, it wasn't like the imperialism of his uncle. But the parody of imperialism was necessary to free the mass of the French nation from the weight of tradition and to work out in pure form the opposition between state power and society. So what is he saying there? Is he saying like that, you know, believing in this parody of the new Napoleon allowed the French nation to kind of figure out the relationship, you know, between the bourgeois, the small holdings and the state and the new bourgeois regime? Is that what he's saying?
It's the way in which the state, the the military and the police turn against the peasantry. That's what works out in pure form the opposition between state power and society. Right?
Yeah.
Because the people who saw themselves as heroes, saw the fatherland as identical to their petty possessions, once they're dispossessed and the soldiers are coming in to kick them out, to make sure the foreclosures go ahead or whatever, to force them into pauperdom, then that dream is shattered completely.
Yeah, it heightens the contradictions, you might say.
You might, yeah.
So Marx then turns on his amazing writing skills here. Like, who wants to read this one again? I think this deserves to be reread.
Yeah, only the devil in person can still save the Catholic Church, and you ask for angels. Similarly, after the coup d'etat, the French bourgeoisie cried out, only the chief of the Society of December 10th can still save bourgeois society. Only theft can still save property. Only perjury, religion, bastardry, the family, disorder, order. Yeah.
I just want to point to Rachel Maddow praying for Trump's life.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Not only praying, but telling everyone to pray for him.
And saying, like, and essentially calling him her friend. She said, like, if your friend got cancer after they smoked cigarettes and you kept telling them not to.
Oh my God.
Would you wish them dead? I would. I would say death to the cigarette smoker. Death to them.
No, I think the questionable analogy here is the word friend, Tom.
I know. I'm joking. I am joking. I know.
I know.
My favorite bit, I didn't watch the debate. God, no, why the fuck would I do that? But I saw a few highlights. But my favorite thing after the debate, like the shock, like, not on awe, but the shock and like
just pure shock.
Yeah, the shock and the shock.
Disdain.
Was on Twitter, like, there was a whole load of people who were tweeting, like, death to America. Like Americans.
Oh my God, they all of a sudden sound like the Ayatollah, yeah.
Seriously, they had pictures of the Ayatollah with, like, underneath the text saying death to America and, like, getting 5,000 retweets. Like,
the Iranian bot networks, like, we got to get on this. This is our big chance. Deploy the bots. Load up the servers. Let's go.
I don't think there was no bots. I think that literally was the death of America, that debate.
No. I just mean that it would be a great time for them to bandwagon with a bunch of bots.
Seriously,
right?
Like, and the drones.
Did you see the clip of the NHK coverage of the debate, the Japanese national broadcaster coverage, where they have simultaneous interpreters dubbing over the debate? They have one interpreter per speaker, right? Because people are going to talk over each other, and if you just have one interpreter, then you can't do it. Like,
naturally, this was probably a very active one for them.
Yeah. So the one in Taiwan, the interpreter in Taiwan, they only got one guy to do it. And he just turned to his boss and said, "How the hell do you expect me to do anything with this?" And just got up and left. But the Japanese one is everyone is doing their simultaneous interpretation simultaneously. So you have 6 people talking over each other in 2 different languages. It's so amazing. It's just like utterly incoherent. You can't take anything out of it at all. And I speak both languages.
Oh, that is brilliant. That is fun.
How beautiful. Wow.
Oh, my God. Right. What's next here? Let me keep going.
Let's move it along.
It's a pity it was on like so late that we couldn't do like a live stream, an Emancipation Network live stream. That would have deserved one.
I'm so glad I didn't watch that.
No, you know what? I watched Star Trek Insurrection instead. And you know what? A lot of people think that that's a bad TNG movie, but let me say, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I think I had a much better night than everyone else who was live streaming that. Like, I tuned into like the Chapo Trap House stream, like on Twitch after the debate was over, and after I had some, fun game times with friends not watching the debate. They all just looked like they just saw like a horrific train wreck, and they were just like, why are we doing this?
I watched a bit of that like the next day, and just like every like 5 minutes, I think your man Matt Chrisman was doing like pharmaceuticals, and like every like 5 minutes he would just go like, "What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is this? What the fuck?" And then it was quite funny. He would just like explode, like he was like you take a load of mushrooms and then you're out of your mind, and you have clarity about once every like fucking 5 minutes.
Oh man.
Your consciousness rises from the swamp. Okay, now
let's go.
We read this bit. Let's look and see what there must have been something else here. Okay. So now we got to this part of so this inherent instability of his class rule, or of his rule, was playing the class against each other. This was getting towards what we talked about previously about Stalin.
Yeah.
So that's where it ends up. That's where these Bonapartist things end up. Because they're not represented in our real class. They have to attack all classes with their own force.
Yeah, it's only the hallucinations of its death struggle, words transformed into phrases, spirits transformed into ghosts. Yeah. The centralization of the state that modern society requires arises only on the ruins of the military bureaucratic government machinery that was forged in opposition to feudalism.
I think that's just a point that is like standardly accepted in like mainstream historical literature at this point. Like, this is just an observation of Marx's that pretty much everyone acknowledges at this point.
That's a banger of a statement. Okay, now is there anything we want to talk about?
The other stuff is basically the whole thing about decrees, right? Like, it's
and the true socialists and safeguarding bourgeois order.
So the true socialists were the German socialists in the 1840s, reactionary German socialists.
And that the book, and this sort of predicts the way that a strong government figure can outflank all of the socialist types in quite in Lassallean way.
That's what you see in the actual Second Empire, right? Is like this weird combination of sort of like socialistic government mobilization of the economy with just these like haphazard decrees and all the other Bonapartist stuff.
Right. And and also this like weird dialectical independence from decrees, with decrees, without decrees, despite decrees, that Louis Napoleon has to offer here.
It doesn't have the like actual majesty of the first Bonaparte's decrees, like where a decree is made and that's that. Like, that's like, this is the word of daddy, and you just gotta listen up. Like, the second Bonaparte makes these decrees, but he's just like contradicting himself constantly, and he's like the actual dad, as opposed to the Zeus standing on top of a mountain throwing lightning bolts dad.
It's like it's kind of like Boris Johnson or Trump, with their bullshit. Let's build a bridge to Ireland. Were they saying that last week?
Oh man.
He came out and said he wanted to build a bridge to Ireland. It would have to be like 50 miles long, and it would have to go through a trench where they buried like 1 million tons of explosives in World War II. They were saying you'd have to like float it. You'd have to float the thing. It's just like
It's,
ridiculous.
yeah. There's yeah, it's like the peasants deserved it, and that never happened. But also, like the peasants said they were cool with it. Like
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to.
Hey, we can do this.
We have one more. We got one more page basically. That's pretty like on my reader. This is it. This is the final stretch.
Leslie, do you want to do it? Do you like what I called you there, Leslie?
Leslie.
The French version of Esri, where you do the
of Esri
liaison between the L and the Esri.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I mean, not wrong. Leslie does have a bit of, it does signal some things in advance that I do like understood. So
we had the non-binary. We had the non-binary. Now we got the Leslie. Uwe la Leslie, I say. Sorry. God damn it. That's
mon frère. Yeah, whatever. All right, let's see how much. You know what? If there's a translation, I'm gonna read the translation.
Definitely do that. Yeah. Is Mistress
de
Morney? Yeah. Just read the translation straight.
Because I know I could read English. So yeah. In the chat, we have the very lesbian version of Esri, which is already the version you got. But anyway, all right. Let's see. Industry and commerce, hence the business affairs of the middle class, are to prosper in hothouse fashion under the strong government.
Don't bother reading that. We don't need that one because it just goes into a whole load of corruption. Yeah, sorry.
All right.
It's just a whole load of corruption there. We don't need.
Yeah, there's just a bunch of bullshit. There's tripotage. There's Leonine, whatever. Okay, so yeah, let's bring it all home. Bonaparte would like to appear as the patriarchal benefactor of all classes, but he cannot give to one without taking from another. Just as it was said of the Duc de Guise. Kyle.
Guise. The Duc de Guise.
All right. Just as it was said of the Duc de Guise in the time of the Fronde, that he was the most obliging man in France because he gave all his estates to all his followers, with feudal obligations to him. So Bonaparte would like to be the most obliging man in France and turn all the property and all the labor of France into a personal obligation to himself. He would like to steal all of France in order to make it a present of it to France, or in order to buy France anew with French money. For as the chief of the Society of December 10th, he must buy what ought to belong to him. And to the institution of purchase belong all the state institutions, the Senate, the Council of State, the Assembly, the Legion of Honor, the military medals, the public laundries, the public works, the railroads, the general staff, the officers of the National Guard, the confiscated estates of the House of Orleans. The means of purchase is obtained by selling each place in the army and the government machinery. But the most important feature of this process, by which France is taken in order to give to her, are the percentages that find their way into the pockets of the head and the members of the Society of December 10th during the turnover. The witticism with which Countess the mistress of Monsieur de Morny, characterized the confiscation of the Orleans estates. It is the first vol, flight and theft, of the eagle.
It's a very good pun. It's not Marx's pun, but it's a very good pun.
Yeah, so that's a pretty dope pun. I needed a translation for me to appreciate. Is applicable to every flight of this eagle, who is more like a raven. He and his follower call out to one another like that of Italian Carthusian, admonishing the miser who ostentatiously counted the goods on which he could still live for years. Thou contestest thy goods, thou shouldst first count thy years. In order not to make a mistake in the year.
Sorry, that should be.
It's countess. Countess.
Yeah. Oh, motherfucker. All right, let me try this again. Admonishing the miser who ostentatiously counted the goods on which he could still live for years. Thou countest thy goods, thou shouldst first count thy years. In order not to make a mistake in the years, they count the minutes. At the court, in the ministries, at the head of the administration and the army, a gang of blokes, of whom the best that can be said is that one does not know whence they come. These noisy, disreputable, rapacious bohemians who crawl into gallooned coats with the same grotesque dignity of the high dignitaries of Soluquet elbow their way forward. One can visualize clearly this upper stratum of the society of December 10th if one reflects that Veron Cavell, a dissolute Philistine character in Balzac's novel Cousin Bet, is its preacher of morals, and Grenier de Cossagnac its thinker. When Guizot, at the time of his ministry, turned this Grenier of an obscure newspaper into a dynastic opponent, he used to boast of him with the quip, "He is the king of buffoons." It would be wrong to recall either the Regency or Louis XV in connection with Louis Bonaparte's court and clique. For, quote, often before France has experienced the government of mistresses, but never before a government of kept men. Quoted from the Madame de Girardin. Driven by the contradictory demands of his situation and being at the same time like a juggler, under the necessity of keeping the public gaze on himself as Napoleon's successor by springing constant surprises, that is to say, under the necessity of arranging a coup d'etat in miniature every day, Bonaparte throws the whole bourgeois economy into confusion, violates everything that seemed inviolable to the to the revolution of 1848, makes them tolerant of revolution and makes others lust for it, and produces anarchy in the name of order, while at the same time stripping the entire state machinery of its halo, profaning it, and making it at once loathsome and ridiculous. The cult of the holy tunic of Trier, a Catholic relic allegedly taken from Christ when he was dying, preserved in the cathedral of Marx's native city. He duplicates in Paris the cult of the Napoleonic imperial mantle. When the imperial mantle finally falls on the shoulders of Louis Bonaparte, the bronze statue of Napoleon will come crashing down from the top of the Vendôme column.
And this was also prophetic, right? The commune did bring it crashing down.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We're here. We're here. We're at the final layers of invective, littered with obscure references.
I did really like the line, "Thou countest thy goods, thou should first count thy years."
Yeah.
That's a very threatening line to say to somebody, isn't it?
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
the miser sitting with his gold. You're counting money. Count your fucking seconds, boyo.
Yeah, right. And
it also rhymes in the Italian, which is very nice.
let's see. Tu fai conto sobre I beni, bisogna prima fare il conto sopra gli anni.
Yeah, Benny and Ani are rhyming with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, that is beautiful. Oh man. And I do like often before France has experienced the government of mistresses, but never before a government of kept men. Zing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, these salon going Parisians, they had some zingers.
Yeah, they could spit bars. Bars.
Yeah. So, is there much substance to this, or is it just a lot of like?
I think it's just fire.
This guy's done.
Yeah, we haven't had a government of rent boys before. Like, we've had a government of prostitutes, but not of rent boys. Yeah. That's the cash value of what's being said here. That like,
and he's talking about the buying of public offices, which is not exactly a thing we've seen with Trump. Like, obviously, There's been corruption under Trump, but there hasn't been selling of offices. as far as we know, at least.
What we know,
And
yeah.
nothing beyond the regular revolving door, it seems. Like,
Yeah.
people make a big deal out of Trump's revolving door, but that is more or less just a...
That's just how it goes, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
But how's that
continuation of practice.
Has that revolving door become more of a thing, though? Like, I think in our, like, I don't know, like in England, say now, like historically, there was a culture of a civil service as a respected class job at the highest level. I think in Ireland as well, but I think more and more now they're infected by, they're just getting like, people from business coming into the civil service, at the top levels and changing it and just getting political nominations in a much cruder way than I think previously was the case.
I mean, I think that's already been extraordinarily weakened in American public life over the last few decades. And like what you see now is maybe a bit more just like personal nepotism creeping into it rather than, the revolving door becoming more important than meritocracy, because that coup already happened. Like
it is pretty funny the degree to which Trump wanted to stack his cabinet with family members.
Yes, exactly.
Not in the way that like Louis Napoleon did, but in the way that the first Napoleon did, with making his family all kings and queens of the different countries of Europe, and it just being a kind of a disaster.
Yeah, no, that is kind of more parallel. Yeah.
What about the bit here then where he used blokes? That's a kind of an interesting.
Yeah, that was cute.
Yeah, it's quite a London translation. But what was it? There was a part here I was going to look at here. Sorry. Let me just see now. Yeah. This bit, like, Bonaparte throws the whole bourgeoisie economy into confusion, violates everything that seemed inviolable to the revolution of 1848, makes some tolerant of revolution and makes others lust for it, and produces anarchy in the name of order, while at the same time stripping the entire state machinery of its halo, profaning it, and making it at once loathsome and ridiculous. Like, that's gotta hurt Americans, that line now. Like,
yeah, I feel like Trump has done that to a far greater degree than Louis Bonaparte ever did. Like, Louis Bonaparte sort of like ended up doing this, like, for sure. Like, he provoked the commune, right? But at the same time, like, there was a kind of like revolutionary progressive character to his regime that somewhat complicates what Marx says here, which I don't think Marx anticipated.
Sure.
Yeah. But in the case of Trump, like, that's spot on.
It's a much younger republic that he is violating and humiliating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the republic for which it stands. Like, here is, something that's lasted a civil war and 2 centuries. And this is really a sign of trouble. Like, that's the internal dynamics can't really hold for much longer. And whereas in France, you have governments going up and down all the time, like, so too will that humiliation and collapse be of a magnified proportion.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And, like, Louis Bonaparte has things like his adventure in Mexico, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, trying to install an emperor there, and then that just being a total disaster. I believe he also got involved in the Meiji Restoration. The French supported the losing side of the war, whereas the British supported the winning side, and the Americans. So
I did not know this.
Yeah, but the adventure in Mexico was really the one that threw his regime into enormous instability. So, yeah. And then he tries to get out of it by fighting a war with Prussia, and obviously that doesn't work out.
Yep.
Well, all I can say is death to America. I think that's what we learned.
I mean, even ultimately in the Franco-Prussian War, like because Bismarck sort of goaded Louis Napoleon into attacking them. Like Marx and Engels were initially like supporting the Franco-Prussian War because it had appeared to have been an attack by France of Germany. Like,
yes,
and I mean that is pretty much what happened. But Bismarck goaded that into happening. Like he played directly. Louis Napoleon played directly into Bismarck's hand.
As was typical, Bismarck was playing 3 moves ahead.
Right. Actual, three-dimensional chess as opposed to the way that people choose to look at some of the erratic decision-making of one, Louis Napoleon or Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. So, so Trump is kind of like, we're saying like that Bismarck is kind of like QAnon? Is that what we're saying? We're saying like, like that Trump is actually Bismarck. He's not Bonaparte.
I mean, perhaps, I don't know. I was thinking more of Spock literally playing 3-dimensional chess in the TOS. But I wouldn't want to compare Bismarck to Spock. That seems wrong. I don't know if
Did you see?
Obviously, in our modern scenario, obviously Bismarck is Nancy Pelosi, who is just like playing this incredible long game of ousting Trump and asserting endless democratic authority. I kid.
Yeah. Yeah, as it turns out, she tested negative for COVID, so she's got to be in on that conspiracy. Pelosi.
Oh, right. Yeah, the old Pelosi Pence conspiracy.
Yeah.
Oh, Did you see this tweet here? That the QAnon are actually. Do you know what they're taking from this tweet?
Oh,
they're saying, "Look, the tweet says going well, comma I think it's exclamation mark. Thank you to all. Full stop. Love in capital letters exclamation. They noticed that the well is got an L and a capital I.
Oh no!
And they're saying, "What is he trying to tell us? This is a code. They're trying to.
We have to go to Illinois.
Get out the twine and the corkboard, folks. We're gonna figure this one out."
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Time to go full Maddow.
Isn't it?
Full Maddow.
Yes.
Full Maddow is mask off. I love Trump so much. He's my friend.
Yeah, I mean,
my daddy.
I mean, it's there was a time when Rachel Maddow and Alex Jones weren't kind of the same thing in my brain, but those were simple days, much simpler days.
Yeah, simpler days. Yeah. You know. He's
Yeah,
a Russian plant, and also pray for him. We need our Russian plant.
Any final thoughts then on the reading that we've just completed before we sign off after 3 hours, our longest session?
This is our longest session.
I think for me, the biggest part here was the bit about petty proprietorship and its relationship to the state. That was fire. That was like, holy shit. You could read this and you could actually get a read on the seemingly totally incoherent political landscape of America. And that was very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, we began this series being like, now I don't want to get too lost in the analogy to, Donald Trump and the fall of the American Republic. And we end with oh, Jesus Christ. like like we end like there's so many interesting like theories of dynamics here. Some of the most famous ones in terms of like class interest are actually kind of shaky, maybe a bit dodgy, but some of the ones about the state and the relationship of like the state to class interest turn out to be some of the most enduring and interesting. And the way that like Bonapartist dynamics, when the state is taking off on its own, and the way that it can kind of angle at declaring war on politics, quote unquote, that's eye-opening and interesting. Aside from the sort of conspiracy theory running through where, the cabal of December 10th, takes hold of the government. Like, what we have here is a really interesting, like, historical narrative, and an attempt to, apply a lot of Marxian analysis to a particular historical event, to, a political situation in a way that demonstrates Marx's sophistication as a thinker, for the most part, except for the conspiracy theory, right? Like, you see how much that personal agency can, does not necessarily correlate with direct class interest. You see the way that, political agency and class fractions can be forward-looking, can depart from their, class destiny. There's a lot of readings of Marx that are refuted by this text. You can't get through the 18th Brumaire and believe a certain story that you get about Marx from a lot of angles. Like the Cold War Marx, is decimated by this text.
And I also think another thing I take away from this is that there are weirdly aspects of Bonaparte that are sort of the ridiculous clownish nature, which we see in Trump. But most of the more substantial aspects are actually characteristic of the Democrats. And that's been an interesting thing for me to see, in terms of the things they represent, and the way they try to impose order on society, the way in which they make use of the state purse to create political patronage. In the past times I read this, none of that ever really occurred to me. So it's been interesting to see that. And I guess there is that sort of crank read of American history of American Bonapartism starts with FDR, and there's sort of this weird argument that America has either descended into fascism or is pseudo-fascist or pseudo-Bonapartist or something like that. There's all these crank reads of American history that come out of that. But I do think there is reading the end part of this book, there's a certain degree of which that kind of Bonapartist reading of American politics should be taken seriously, while also acknowledging how obviously capitalism's changed, world dynamics have changed, and settler colonialism is a factor in American politics that it's not in France.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also what did I take from? I like he's quite explicit in this idea of the class operating as a class for itself. I think that's something that's very interesting, and clearly expressed. I also do you know what I really like is his way of describing history and the process of, you know, how a class learns a certain lesson from this action and it goes down a different avenue after that, and then that interacts with another class in an, you know, formation in another way, and that these kind of routes kind of have to be taken, kind of are, you know, are taken, and he makes he describes the logical progression of these movements in a way, this, you know, this kind of unfolding way that I find, having read this, incredibly insightful. I really do. Like, I think that I think that's like his way of writing history and explaining his is you know, it's amazing. You know, it's like, I put it up there with like value theory, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah, this is another part of his like kind of theoretical corpus, and it's like not quite as spelled out as, you know, his critique of political economy, or, you know, even like the sort of outlines of a theory of historical materialism that he gives. But the way that, you know, you get from like class interest and how that builds into political coalitions and ends up with a dynamic of society and parts of the state fighting, you know, different parts of itself. Like, this is a big contribution, and like this and, you know, the Civil War in France are the primary, like, those are the big applications of this. It's the big applications of, okay, so what is this historical materialist, like, theoretical background supposed to add to a political analysis? These are the exemplars we have from Marx.
And I definitely see a lack of this kind of analysis today, where sort of like the kinds of punditry that Marx is doing has a memory span that is longer than like 2 months.
Yeah.
You know?
You might say that.
Sort of like laying out, how did we get from an inciting incident to here, and how did people continuously undermine their own positions? That kind of punditry, you know, because this is partially journalistic, what Marx is doing here. You know, it has sort of both sides of Marx the journalist, in the sense that, like,
yes,
it's very, very observant, but also very conspiratorial. I just think we could do with like an accounting of, you know, how do we get from the coup of George W. Bush to the nightmare world we live in now, right? Like, you know, it's that kind of political history would be interesting to see more of.
And maybe a more rigorous accounting, you know, beyond the political, self-serving, like, political mythos, like,
yeah,
like, it would be good to see. Like, yeah, I think, Tom, you have the same kind of inkling that it's not really a coup. It is sort of American institutions functioning as intended, which is to say horribly.
Oh dear. Yeah, like, well, just going to say, like, you know, it's more than 2 months, you know, memory, Kyle. He actually, I think the very first page starts off with ancient Rome.
Well, so, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Is Marx a classicist? And in a way that isn't just like perfunctory, like the way that American conservatives throw around Rome.
He's not like a classicist in the way that Boris Johnson likes to mention Greek names.
Oh man.
You know,
Cato once said that tyranny is bad. You know, that's why I don't want to have universal health.
That's why I work for the Cato Institute.
Yeah. Right.
I thought the Cato Institute was no, I'm not going to make a joke. I'm too tired.
Yeah, this has been a grueling session.
It's been a grueling session. Is there okay? One thing we just haven't discussed as a roundup. Just last question then is, what can we learn about for our? What do we learn, or what kind of insights have the panelists yourselves drawn from this and his analysis of the class forces around at the time, the nature of the class forces, the state, the army, etc., for our hopes for a communist revolution in the core countries?
Oof.
Because that's our real reason to kind of read this, really, isn't it? When we get down to it, that's what we're after.
Yeah,
primarily.
aside from just the pleasure of reading it, yes.
Yeah.
Pleasure's bad.
The priests have gotten to you, Tom.
Yeah, really.
They've fucked me up long time.
Come on, we need to have an Aristotelian appreciation for pleasure, even if it isn't the good in itself. How do I say this? Like, we're in such a vastly different situation, and by starting with that table where we are comparing the contemporary proletariat to the, disintegrating like peasantry, like unfortunately, the way that Marx deals with the lumpen proletariat is via conspiracy. So some of the most important questions that we have aren't really, we don't get like that great of a sense from this text on how to operationalize on them. What we get is a warning that, if there's someone that comes along promising sausages, that we got to get ready.
Hey. If anybody comes over to me and starts promising me sausages, I'm out of there. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Someone starts pitching sausage, you better duck. Which is, already my policy anyway. But
unless they're duck sausages.
Yeah.
Then what do you do?
It depends if the sausage is attached to it. But the point is, like, I don't know that we can do like direct historical induction here, like for revolutionary, like kind of.
I'm not talking about direct induction, but like,
or not even direct induction, because what we see here is like the proletariat is immediately taken off the stage here, and what plays out is a farcical like drama of like mostly counter-revolutionary forces, like, and the varying degrees that the party of order eats itself. This is, perhaps de Maistre in reverse, like, or instead of the revolution devouring its children, the counter-revolution devours its children. Like,
that's a very good point. Yeah.
And so, like, perhaps we get some advice for, like as a series of negative examples for what not to get suckered into when the proletariat and its political alternatives are off the table.
Yeah, that tracks for me. I mean, I guess so. Okay, so I think for many people in the developed Western world, the center of the capitalist economy, for at least a little while longer, your relationship to the sort of liberals as a leftist is a major political question. And I think what I get from this, aside from the ways in which like liberals can be enormously self-sabotaging, is and social democrats for that matter, because they also get a whipping in this one.
Yep, they're here
too. Is the way in which post-war compromise, social democracy / kind of like Peronist, weird, like, you know, semi-pro worker, like corporatist politics that you see in America exhibit a lot of the qualities that Marx attributes to Louis Bonaparte, and a lot of the quote-unquote qualities of Bonapartism. And I think what it comes to then is like, do you take a stance against all of that because you agree with Marx's theory of the state and the way it relates to class? Or do you think that Marx's theory of the state was wrong and go in the right socialist direction, right? And I think that reading this text poses that question very clearly in a way that most people today would not pose it. There's a lot of waffling on that question. And, you know, for obvious reasons of like, well, like welfare and healthcare and stuff for the workers is like saving people's lives right the fuck now. So that's a valuable thing. But yeah, like I think that's what I take away in terms of revolutionary strategy is like, well, do I agree with Marx's theory of the state? Do I agree with his theory of the post-state possibility of society? And your strategy is going to fall out of that to a large but not total extent.
Okay, well, on that note, I think...
Where do you end up, Tom? No, I just wanted to pose the same question to you. What's your...
Where do I... What, with the revolutionary strategy stuff?
Yeah. What's the cash value of this text for you? You know, other than obviously the pure pleasure of reading it and talking through it with our friends. You know, like which I mean, this has been, I think, is been a pretty fun way to spend the apocalypse. So I mean, I don't discount that, but you know, in terms of the cash value here, as pro-revolutionaries in 2020 watching the world burn, like, how, you know, what do you get out of this?
Well, I think on a base level, you know, we got to the proletariat. We have to organize our institutions to act so that we become acting as a class for our own class interests. I think the quote unquote left parties we see in developed countries are basically capitalist parties. So, you know, I think that's a real kind of core, obviously, revolutionary point. I think also the understanding of the class dynamics of how he describes the Social Democrats and how they were kind of his I think in chapter 3 where he just slates this idea where the petty bourgeois, who they assume that their interests are not their interests, but the general interests of the country. I think that is a key understanding that like we need to like be absolutely fucking fiercely attack that type of like socialism in quote inverted commas, and I think for a revolutionary struggle, I think we should learn. Getting back again to the point about how Marx interprets the movements of the classes in their battles or in their dynamics, us getting that kind of a dynamic understanding of how classes these things in history works is extremely important for us to understand our own strategy, and what type of things we should or should not do, and outcomes we should or should not expect. Because at the moment there's not even, I don't know, there is no awareness of understanding, or even if I would even go further, I think people actually understand some of the stuff, right? But they just don't. But they just kind of go, oh well, people. There's a goddamn huge industry of being like a socialist, or somebody who's a communist who talks about like a good game. When it comes down to it, they have absolutely no interest in revolutionary struggle. None. None. Every, like say for example, Chapo. Does anybody in Chapo Trap House have any revolutionary instinct? What do you think?
I don't think anyone there would agree with Marxist theory of the state. I think they're pretty much all buy into the right socialist view of the state.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. What's the equivalent in the UK? Like, I don't know, Novara Media or somebody.
That's the one that comes to mind.
They call themselves communists, right? I'd say Matt Christman would call himself a socialist in a slightly more, or he certainly lets on he is. But like, but when the push comes to the shove, they're the right wing of the SPD, and like, like in Novara Media, you've got two. There's three of them on it. Two of them call themselves communists, and they talk about job creators and encouraging entrepreneurs and stuff. Like they literally like
they've gone the way of the Saint Simonians.
Oof.
Yeah, that's all they are. That's all they are.
I haven't checked in with our friends at Novara Media for 5 years.
But they literally they couch themselves in the language. They're people who came up like through college and were kind of like the radical aesthetic and stuff like that, and then they've just gone for the money, or if they ever changed their politics, who knows?
I mean, fucking welcome to the Marxist tradition. I mean, the other tradition is the tank fetish, and like, and that seems to be like the who's monopolizing discourse after the end of Sanders and Corbyn. Like, those are like, don't vote, read State and Revolution and Embrace the Mortal Science, or read Foundations of Leninism. Like, and I mean, I'm not saying that those people are like going to get like, a whole lot of traction or do anything other than start some cults, but like, yeah, like,
I haven't even started on the anarchists.
The anarchists, you know what? The anarchists are the only one doing like anything. The anarchists are out there providing like riot support to the black proletariat when it fights back against the state. So the anarchists are the only ones doing shit for the real movement.
Well, that is, maybe that's probably true at the moment, but it's not. It's a movement, but it's not the real movement. It's not the class acting as itself.
It's the only movement that's there. Like, it is the only real movement. And sure, there could be some way.
For the class. It's just not.
I don't know about that. Like, I think it is like in deindustrializing like American society, the proletariat not wanting to be like attacked by the police and fighting back against the police is asserting its right to live, and it is cast in racial terms because of the disproportionate amount of police murders. But the worst nightmare of the bourgeoisie is that this would generalize into like a proletarian revolt against the agents of the bourgeois state. That is the worst nightmare. Like,
I completely agree, but all I'm saying is, like, I completely agree with you. Like, I am well up for it, totally, and I think the anarchists are like on the ground and doing stuff, but like, it's not the movement that will
anarchist leadership or whatever, but like, it's the only movement.
Totally.
That's the thing.
I'm not even disagreeing to you. Like, I just feel like that if we're going to criticize the Social Democrats for trying to get people healthcare, right? And if we're going to criticize the tanks for, I don't know what the hell they're doing, right? We got to criticize the anarchists for what they're not doing too. What they are doing is good, and they're in there on the ground doing that stuff. But it's not coalescing into this idea of you might say the class is doing something as a class. I would say that it's minimal, and that's our left. We don't have this kind of centrist, if you want to call it, kind of orthodox Marxist position. And I honest to God, I think that's where we need to go. I'm not somebody who reads Marx and agrees with everything he says. Like, I'm not a dogmatist. But I do think that this strategy, like that all of our current strategies are not working. I would say that the least wrong might be the anarchists.
Yeah, I can get with that and say that, there is something lacking in the quote strategy there. Look, frankly, a lot of anarchists do not have a strategy and do not think in terms of strategy. Think more in terms of tactics of, how do we outflank the cops tonight or something. And they don't have that sort of long-term access, and that it would be better to, get anarchists to think in that more of a long-term sense of how do you build this movement out into something that can continue to fight for itself, not just on the night of the riot. And, we don't end up having to do substitutionalism for the proletariat once they're crushed.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. Like, acknowledging that part of the reason anarchists don't do that is because the history of anarchist strategic theory is pretty dire. Like, it's not like the anarchist tradition doesn't have a history of strategizing. It's just conspiratorial and terrorist is the bent of anarchist strategy for the most part.
And honestly, like, modern anarchists don't have that element really at all.
No, they don't.
I think that's giving modern anarchists a little too much credit, and I am defending anarchists on the whole, like that.
No, but in the world, we don't see them out there like fucking, killing, and you don't see them like assassinating like CEOs. That's not a thing we see now. We would have seen 100 years ago.
Yeah, but that's not it's more of a propaganda of the deed against property now, which is, I think, much more defensible anyway. But whatever. Like, but I think that Kyle's point still stands, that the body of anarchist like strategic theory is, not great, and it is mostly like conspiratorial. Like, and there are better anarchists out there that don't see things like that, and I even think some of the ones that operate in sort of conspiratorial cells see themselves as doing autonomy, see themselves as doing, with their comrades, like the only thing that can be done. And so I'm not even just like spitting at them. You know what I mean? Like, they just don't think like some proletarian democracy thing popping out of this is really possible. So they're trying to accomplish anything. But like, if this is going to go anywhere other than, ending up with the party of order taking control and crushing everything, it has to go somewhere. So, I certainly agree with the broad outlines of the Marxian critique of anarchism, but the details, that's where the devil is.
I just thought I'd show you this meme. Somebody sent it to me. The IRA ahead of their time, wearing masks, social distancing, personal protective equipment.
Oh God.
That's a good one. Right.
But, I would say that I appreciate the degree to which Marx's, like, Ezra, you were talking before about how, like, you can't view politics as a pure extension of, like, ideal class interests.
Right.
You can't just sort of like move from that ideal typical analysis directly into political analysis. And I will say that like I appreciate the nuance that Marx brings here and how like that can kind of overlap with what anarchists do in their organizing. I think there's a lot of pitfalls that are available there, especially the ones that go into, because like in a way, what the Bolsheviks did in the Russian Revolution was to co-opt the SR program.
Yeah,
right? It was like it was like taking the Kautskyite German social democracy and merging it with the SR peasant line. And that's a danger. That's a real danger. But, it's... I guess it's nice to see that there's like theoretical room in Marx to examine those border areas or those sort of hybrid areas of politics in a way that may be fruitful in relationship to anarchists.
So, like, this other thing there is like, how come how many chapters? 7 chapters, nearly 150, 60 pages. Never once in it did Marx mention like socialist or communist podcasts. What the hell is that about?
Are you telling me that communist podcasts are entirely peripheral to the revolutionary process?
Fuck this, lads. Fuck this. Let's produce the paper.
Gotta go sell newspapers, Tom. Obviously, Marx would approve of that.
Derek was talking partially about like how this text is a bit of a rebuttal of Bakunin by way of never talking about Bakunin at all, and so I think that podcast left podcaster beefing stuff that we see today is very like subterranean in this text.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh dear. Right, I am going to bring us offline. That was the longest one we've ever done. 3 hours, 36 minutes, and 9 seconds. I'm going to say thanks to everybody who's surviving in the chat.
Yeah, we did
all the way back through it.
Thank
you.
We
got Alex. We got What is Politics?
We got
Grimlock.
Dilla Sizzy or Sizzy. I don't know how to pronounce that. Thanks for coming, Alex.
Flynn.
Alex always holding it down in chat.
That's right, Alex. Filling it up. Senan Kerr. Who else? Anyway, there's loads. Yeah, I can't see. It goes back so far. Thanks, everybody. This is the end of this one. These will be edited up over the next few months and released. We did it in 15 episodes. What did we predict?
Oh, I don't know.
I think I predicted 12.
I think it was 12. Yeah. We weren't far from the mark.
Yeah. Omar, thanks for coming. Yeah. We're we're getting better at predictions. That's what we're doing. That's what science is all about, baby.
Positivism. We can be positivist about our own podcasting.
There we
go. Length. Yeah.
Hey, at least we got metrics on something. Good night, people.
Or else we just threw shit at the wall and got lucky. That's probably closer to the real fact. We want to do the all one right one. I'm going to put it up for a vote, so I'm going to be trying to get everybody to vote for it. It'll be that or Thomas the Tank Engine class analysis. There is a Thomas the Tank Engine book where it's about strike breaking and getting scabs in and shitting on the dirty workers, the shunting trains. It's fucking unbelievable.
That's not great.
No, it's I couldn't believe my friend showed it to me. He was reading it was his kid's favorite book. He was like, fuck's sake.
Holy shit.
Oh god. Right, the fat controller. Let's get out of here.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.